right, I want to call this meeting to order at 6:30. This is the Planning Commission meeting for Thursday, February 27th. All right. Charlie, can we have a roll call, please?
Yes, Commissioner Donaldson.
Here.
Commissioner Keller has an excused absence this evening, and Commissioner Sohane also has an excused absence. Commissioner Young. Here. Vice Chair Thompson.
Here. And
Chair Guerrero.
Here.
So we have a quorum of 4 commissioners present.
Thank you, Charlie. All right, moving on. For item number 3 on the agenda, we have a recognition of our outgoing commissioner, Commissioner Linda Barrera. If you want to go ahead and I'm going to be presenting you with a resolution today.
You want to step to the podium? I know it's a little odd for, I was going to say Commissioner Barrera, former Commissioner Barrera, to be on the other side of the dais. But we do have a resolution here for you that is a group effort, been contributions from your fellow commissioners. It is a resolution of the Planning Commission of the City of Emeryville expressing the Commission's sincere appreciation to Linda Barrera for over 3 years of service on the Emeryville Planning Commission. Whereas on September 6, 2016, the City Council appointed Linda Barrera to the Emeryville Planning Commission for a 3-year term through June 30th, 2019, and on June 18th, 2019, the Council reappointed Linda for a second 3-year term from July 1st, 2019 to June 30th, 2022. And whereas Linda resigned from the Commission effective January 23rd, 2020, because as a casualty of the regional housing crisis, she has had to vacate her spacious Emeryville loft and relocate to a tiny apartment in Oakland, which we now understand has been replaced by a tiny apartment in San Francisco, making her ineligible to continue to serve on the commission. And whereas Linda served as vice chair of the Planning Commission from July 2017 to August 2018, and as chair of the commission from August 2018 to July 2019, and whereas during Linda's term on the commission, a number of major development projects were approved and or reviewed by the commission, including the Sherwin-Williams mixed-use project, Marketplace Parcel B Laboratory and Office Building, Ani Christie mixed-use project, 5850 Shell Mound residential project, Adeline Springs residential and live-work project, Emeryville Center for the Arts, and Biomed build-out of the Novartis portion of the Chiron PUD, to name a few. And Linda played an active role in the deliberations on these and many other projects. And whereas during Linda's term on the commission, a number of long-range planning efforts were recommended for approval by the commission and adopted by the City Council, including regulations for cannabis manufacturing and retail dispensaries, regulations for short-term rentals, regulations for accessory dwelling units, an addendum to the pedestrian and bicycle plan, update of the local hazard mitigation plan, parking management plan, 40th and San Pablo bus hub and redesign of 40th Street, general plan and zoning amendments to increase density along San Pablo Avenue, and review of the capital improvement program for conformance to the general plan. And the commission also held study sessions on several ongoing long-range planning projects, including sign regulations, unit mix in high-rise buildings, elimination of minimum parking requirements, and bird-safe building standards. And Linda played an active role in the deliberations on all of these efforts. I'm exhausted just thinking about it. That's just the tip of the iceberg. And whereas in her job as a professional planner, Linda served as staff to the City of Alameda Planning Board, and thus as an Emeryville Planning Commissioner had a unique perspective and a special ability to feel staff's pain. And whereas Linda's discerning observations, astute comments, and attention to detail have improved the projects that have come before her, her concern for our community has made Emeryville a better place, and her good cheer has made her a pleasure to work with. And whereas Linda always brought a lightheartedness to community discussions, asking designers to have fun with the design and go a little crazy to make this place really special. And whereas Linda has always displayed professionalism and compassion, moving agenda items forward to make it easier for all voices, even those with young children, to be heard. And whereas Linda brought her knowledge from the neighboring community of Alameda to make Emeryville a great neighbor in the East Bay. And whereas during her time as a planning commissioner, Linda has continued to be a strong voice in advocating for the greater good of Emeryville community members. And whereas Linda's insight and awareness of Emeryville will be missed, if she should ever get her unfortunate residency situation ironed out, we will welcome her return. If not, we all know that she will continue to learn from whatever new endeavors life may bring her. And whereas Commissioner Barrera's friendly smile and dynamic energy exude a contagious positivity wherever she goes, and whereas Linda's thoughtful and insightful comments and wisdom on a variety of long-range and current planning issues will be greatly missed, now therefore be it resolved that the Emeryville Planning Commission hereby expresses its sincere appreciation to Linda Barrera for over 3 years of outstanding service to the city of Emeryville and its citizens, and wishes her the best of luck in all of her future endeavors. Approved by the Planning Commission of the City of Emeryville at a regular meeting held on Thursday, February 7th, 2020.
All right, thank you so much. That was great. Thank you very much. That was so wonderful. As Charlie mentioned, some of the information in the beginning of that resolution is the tip of the iceberg of what staff and the commission does for the City of Emeryville. So I just want to put it on the record that the dedication of all of you folks that have day jobs to come out here and, you know, read those big packets that we get every month and come and volunteer your time here is an extremely meaningful endeavor that you and that we all have taken on here. And I feel like the City of Emeryville is very lucky to have dedicated community members like you and dedicated staff, because aside from these, you know, meetings that we have once a week, there are years and years of work that staff put into all of these projects. So I do feel your pain and how much effort it takes to get to the point where the community gets to see the work that you do. So I want to thank each and every one of you for all of your dedication to the city, and I leave here with a heart full of gratitude to have been part of all of this. So thank you very much.
And
Thank
we
you.
would like to present you with a suitably framed copy of this resolution.
Excellent. Oh, yeah. This is going into my new place.
Is it big enough?
About the same square footage of my new apartment in San Francisco, so I think it'll take up the entire space. Thank you. Thank
Wow.
you so much.
Linda, wow. You heard it from Charlie. You've done all of that work in 3 years. That's amazing. And I've learned so much from being able to be a colleague here with you on the commission. And I'm really excited to see what's next for you. I'm glad that you're not leaving the Bay. And happy to see that you're still going to be part of the Bay Area family. And so that's what I'm really looking forward to seeing happen here in the Bay. So while you're leaving us, I know that you're going on to do some great things here in San Francisco Bay. So congratulations.
Thank you.
Yeah. Are there any other commissioners that'd like to say any words, parting words to Commissioner Barrera?
Just that we'll really miss you and wish you all the best for everything.
Thank you so much.
Ditto very much, Leon. You're the one who got me convinced into joining this. So for all of you guys out there, you can blame her.
So yeah, just want to say, yeah, here. It's great to work beside you.
Thank you. Thank you all very much. Good luck tonight on your long meeting. There's lots of things on the agenda, so I'll leave it at that. Thank you.
Cheers. All right. So at this time, I'd like to open it up for public comment for any items that are not on tonight's agenda. All right. Seeing none, we're moving on to item number 5. This is approval of action minutes for January 23rd, 2020. Do you have any comments or
So-
adjustments?
I just have a comment that 7.2, the master sign program, and 8.2. I know we had sort of a robust discussion about both of these things, and I didn't feel like the minutes really captured sort of an essence of the discussions that kind of affected the vote. I don't have a change though to update that. I just wanted to highlight it and say if it's possible to capture in a sentence or two the thrust of the conversation. I'd say for future meeting minutes, let's add that.
All right. If I could just note, we typically try to do that for study session items. where there's no action that the commission is taking. So it is a bit succinct there, so that could be expanded on. For action items where the commission actually takes a vote, we usually don't include much about the commission's deliberations. We just indicate what the motion was and whether it passed or not.
Thank you, Charlie.
And I'd still move to pass them.
Okay.
Second.
All right. We have moved by Vice Chair Thompson, seconded by Commissioner Donaldson.
All right, and I believe Commissioner Young was not there, so he will need to abstain from this. Is that without exception then?
Yes.
So it'll be 3 ayes and 1 abstention.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm. All right. We have item number 6. This is the Community Development Director's report. Charlie, you want to take it away?
Yes, thank you, Chair Guerrero. First, with regard to recent city council meetings, the council has had 2 meetings since your last meeting, and those council meetings were on February 4th and February 18th. On February 4th, the council passed a resolution supporting a bus-only lane on the Bay Bridge. The council also took a number of actions related to the paid parking program. They approved a contract with IPS Group for technology and related services, i.e. meters, and putting them in and maintaining them. They passed the first reading of an ordinance establishing parking meter zones in the North Hollis and Triangle neighborhoods, and they passed a resolution establishing the exact locations and rates for the parking meters in the North Hollis and Triangle parking meter zones. The council also unanimously passed a resolution declaring a state of urgent action with regard to bicycle and pedestrian safety in the city and directing the city manager to undertake certain actions. These included applying for state funding to create a local road safety plan, pursuing several quick build pedestrian and bicycle improvements, completing a study to establish 20-mile-per-hour speed limits on bicycle boulevards, completing existing capital improvement program pedestrian and bicycle projects, finalizing the design of the San Pablo Avenue multimodal project, and finalizing the design of the 40th and San Pablo bus hub and redesign of 40th Street, among many other things. And at the February 18th meeting, the council passed the second reading of the ordinance establishing the parking meter zones in the North Hollis and Triangle neighborhoods. In other news, I just want to alert you that at a special meeting prior to next Tuesday's regular city council meeting, the council will consider appointing a new planning commissioner to fill Commissioner Barrera's unexpired term. The candidates to be interviewed by the council include Oriana Damasi, Marshall Huggins, and Erica Mendez. The special meeting begins here in the council chambers at 5:45 p.m. next Tuesday. And Brad Helfenberger from the Community Services Department, who is the city's representative on the County Complete Count Committee for the Census, will be here at your next meeting to make a presentation on the 2020 U.S. Census, and that will be on March 26th at your next Planning Commission meeting. That concludes my report. I'd be happy to respond to any questions.
Thank you, Charlie. Do we have any questions from the commissioners here at this point? All right, see no questions. We'll move on. I'm not sure if it's just me, but I'm getting a little feedback here behind us. Are you all experiencing that too? Yeah?
Can we turn the mics down a little bit, maybe?
There we go.
Thank you.
Thank you. All right. And so we'll, for item number 7, this is your opportunity to for disclosure of conflicts of interest and ex parte communications. All right. Seeing none, we're going to open up for public hearings. We have item 8.1. This is the second story edition. I'm going to invite Navarre up for a presentation.
Good evening, Chair Guerrero. Good evening, Commission.
Hello.
Just getting set up here. As I get set up, there is a materials board that I just passed over to Commissioner Young, and that is for this project. The applicant and property owners are available tonight for questions, but do not have a separate presentation for the Commission. So we're talking about 1025 47th Street on 47th Street between Adeline and San Pablo. For project overview, the project is to add a second story to an existing single-story residential unit. The first floor retains 1 bedroom and expands common areas, while the second floor will add 3 bedrooms and bathrooms. There's an increase to the landscaping on site and modification to the existing parking, and there are no changes to the existing rear duplex at the very rear of the property. For the project history, the Planning Commission reviewed this as a study session in October. 2 residents spoke at that meeting in favor of the project. For the commissioner comments that night, no issues were raised with the proposed increase in FAR. Feedback was focused on the design of the project, suggesting diversifying the materials, adding articulation, and consistent placement of windows for the project. And there was also a request for more information on bicycle parking and discards enclosure. So since you've seen the project, the applicant did change the exterior finishes from stucco to a cement board siding, and corbels were added to the roof eaves. There is an update to the color of the windows and door trim, and the window placement was corrected so that it's now consistent along the second floor. Details were added to the front porch entry, and they also provided bicycle parking, trash enclosure, and landscaping details that were not included before. And the color elevations and renderings reflect these changes. So let's get into that. So at the top here, we have the existing 1-story home. In the middle is what was reviewed at the previous study session, and at the bottom is the new revised rendering taking in the feedback that was received that evening. So this is not to scale, but for an idea of comparison, we have the existing home on the left there and the proposed on the right. And here are the comparisons of elevation. So at the top is what's existing in context of the neighboring buildings adjacent to this project, and then what's proposed on the bottom elevations there. So for site and landscaping plant mix has not changed since you've seen it last. What has changed are the trash enclosures have been added, the bike lockers and landscaping that I mentioned, and the bike parking. So let's look at that a little bit closer. So there are the trash enclosures towards the rear of the property. You can't see them from the front. They're adjacent to the respective residences. The bike lockers and landscaping were shifted so that there'd be better access to the bike lockers along the side of the property. So those are lockable, covered bike storage containers. And there's also bike parking provided within the garage for the front unit as well now. So for the first floor, we have the existing and proposed, as I mentioned before. This is becoming more of an open floor plan, but retaining 1 bedroom and bathroom. And then the second floor is having several bedrooms added, as well as multiple bathrooms and common space. So here's the elevation facing the street. This is what you'd see from 47th Street. This is the east elevation. You can see the driveway towards the back. That would be to the left side of the screen. The front is what's facing 47th Street here. And the windows have been evened out since the last time you saw this proposal. This is the rear of the property, so this is what you see from the duplex at the very back. And then the west elevation of the property. So this is part of the medium density residential area for the general plan. It's also an area of stability where there's not anticipated to have significant changes, be mostly residential in nature. So that the designation does not change, does not preclude changes for demolition or construction or building modifications. So this is consistent with the general plan. It's also part of the medium density residential zone, and there's no overlays. It's an existing multi-unit residential property, so there's no changes in use. It's just the size of one of the units. This is compliant with our floor area ratios, our residential density, and building height. And off-street parking is not proposed to change. 3 spaces are estimated demand, 2 spaces are required. The applicant's proposing 3 spaces. There's no change in total numbers, but the driveway is being narrowed to 10 feet. It's currently wider than that. And bicycle parking, 1 space is proposed per unit as required by code. So for setbacks, all the required setbacks are met, open space is met, and landscaped area is exceeded. The conditional use permit findings are that the project needs to be consistent with the general plan, that the characteristics and design of the proposed use are compatible with the neighborhood, and the proposed use is compatible with utilities and emergency response systems that are available, that the proposed use contributes to the general well-being of the community and complies with the planning regulations. For the development bonus, that would be to go over the base FAR to add that second story. The proposed project must be compatible with the surrounding neighborhood in scale, form, materials, and street orientation. The proposed project must be designed to minimize the appearance of off-street parking and facilities and have a maximum driveway width of 10 feet. And the design of the project is consistent with the general plan. And that's continued there. That kind of happened in a weird way. So, but yes, it's consistent with the design review requirements of this project. So staff recommends approval of the proposed second-story addition at 1025 47th Street, subject to the conditions of approval that are attached in your packet. And I am available for any questions, as is the applicant.
Thank you, Navar.
Yeah.
Do we have any questions from the commissioners for Navar at this time?
I just have a quick question about the family-friendly design guidelines. Do they apply in this case?
They don't, because it's fewer than 10 units,
That's what I
although
thought.
many of the aspects of it are incorporated into the project. We didn't outline them specifically because it's not required.
Any other questions? No? All right. So I know that there's no presentation from the applicant, but are there questions for the applicant at this time from the commissioners? No? Well, all right. I want to go ahead and open up. This is a public hearing. Open up for public comment. Oh. All right. Seeing no public comment, we're going to go ahead and close public hearing. And we can open up for deliberation. I'm going to start over here with Commissioner Young.
Thank you very much for the presentation, Navarro, and for the hard work you guys did on the floor plans. I think they're a huge improvement from what it was before. Really a viable addition to the neighborhood. I think it'll look really great on it. I only had one concern on the window that faces out of the dining room, but it's a fixed window, or is that a hinge on there for fire access? Was that some question I had? And other than that, the building's beautiful.
Can you introduce yourself too?
Good evening, members of the commission. My name is Maxwell Beaumont. I'm the project architect. To address your question, yes, that window will be fixed, and there's actually a fence within 5 feet.
Oh, okay.
A 6
You'll
foot
really see
fence.
it.
Yes,
So you're not going to expose the house or vice versa.
correct.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.
All right. Do you have any more questions, Commissioner?
No, thank you.
Yeah. Okay. Commissioner Donaldson?
I was not at the study session. I was absent at that time, but I looked at the former plans, and I think these are much improved. I think that the house will blend well with the neighborhood, and it looks all right. My comments just pertain to the landscaping plan. The evergreen pears are really susceptible to fire blight. They don't do well around here. A lot of them are dying back, so I think that tree should be replaced. And I know that there is a condition of approval that the landscape plan should be looked at by the community development director, so hopefully that will get taken care of there. And the turf, I think would be great if it was specified that was low water use turf.
Thank you. Vice Chair Thompson?
Yeah, I think I wasn't in attendance in the first round, but when I did see the plans, I relayed some comments back and found quite a few faults with what was presented in terms of inconsistency, even with just general regulations in terms of the materials and other things. But I'm very happy to see that a lot of these things have been fixed and that this is actually a great addition. And there's been a care that it wasn't present in the first packet. So, so I think, congratulations to the applicant as well as the staff for bringing the project forward.
Thank you. All right. And I'm in agreement with my fellow commissioners. I feel as though the design that's represented here that we're looking at today is a big improvement from what we saw the first time. I appreciate the framing of the building with and it looks very similar to the building next to it in terms of fitting into the neighborhood. That you did a great job in terms of receiving the feedback that was given to you in the last meeting. So thank you for that. At this point, I don't have any further comments for this project, and this is an item that we have this is a public hearing. So at this point, looking for an approval from my commissioners.
I would approve this project the way it stands. I like the porch. I like the fencing around the front of it. I like the window layout. I like the surfaces. I think it's a handsome second floor. I just kind of hope the building in the back might get painted the same color, just so it doesn't contrast, or maybe some form of darker tan, just so it kind of make that building look better, or make both buildings look better. I won't want to add a condition on that. I think that's up to the applicant to decide to make that if they want to. Leave it there.
Do you need a second?
Do we have a, was that a move to move forward with this?
It was a move to move forward with this, yes.
Okay,
With this.
That was a motion.
yes. And do we have a second?
I'll second it.
All right, seconded by Vice Chair Thompson. Can we have a roll call vote, Charlie, please?
Yes, indeed. Commissioner Donaldson?
Aye.
Commissioner Keller is absent. Commissioner Sohani is absent. Commissioner Young?
Aye.
Vice Chair Thompson?
Aye.
And Chair Guerrero.
Aye.
4 ayes, the application is approved. This decision may be appealed to the City Council within 15 days.
Thank you. Congratulations.
Congratulations.
All right, we're going to continue on. We have item 8.2. This is the Emeryville Round Temporary Fleet Parking Conditional Use Permit Amendment. Diana?
Let's see. Excuse me while I manage the PowerPoints. There we go. So you may recall a couple years ago, you approved a conditional use permit for Emeryville Round temporary fleet parking. Right now, they are seeking an amendment to that. The applicant is Veronica Hattrop, who is here tonight from the Emeryville Transportation Management Association, and the landowner is now Scott Piltig for Biomed Realty. They have bought the property in the meantime. On March 15th, 2018, the commission approved a major use permit for the ETMA to use about 3/4 of the Rifkin lot at 4555 Horton Street for temporary parking of Emeryville Round shuttle vehicles and employee cars until April 15th, 2020, which is pretty close. The ETMA is negotiating a lease with Caltrans for a yard on Mandela Parkway under the MacArthur Maze Freeway structure. The ETMA has a conditional use permit from the City of Oakland and is applying for an encroachment permit for on-street access improvements, including a left turn lane. The ETMA expects to start construction in spring of 2020. I think late breaking news is summer, and relocate, really still planning to relocate in early 2021 because they're not going to wait to start their design work. So the project is an amendment to the conditional use permit extending the time limit for site occupancy from 2 years to 3 years. It's located just south of the PDR unit, which used to be Novartis and is now owned by Biomed Realty. It's surrounded on 2 sides by Sherwin-Williams site. Across the street is Grifols, and to the south of that is the Artist Co-op. So the findings required are it's consistent with the general plan, which it is because it helps to implement transit policies. The location and such are compatible with the surrounding area. And this is true because Sherwin-Williams project has been delayed because of required cleanup, and now they don't plan to move in, have any residences ready to occupy by April 2021. The proposed use is consistent with wastewater, water, fire, and police, and just as when it was approved, the fleet parking won't use those wastewater or water, and they won't use fire or police more than other parking would. The proposed use will provide a service that will contribute to the general well-being of the community, and it will because this will enable Emeryville Round service to continue. The proposed use complies with applicable standards and requirements of the planning regulations, and it still does. So staff recommends that the Planning Commission approve the amendment to the conditional use permit, extending the occupancy time limit for Emeryville Round temporary fleet parking at 4555 Horton Street from 2 years to 3 years, so the approval will expire on April 15th, 2021, unless it is further extended. And that concludes my report. I'll be happy to answer any questions and we call Veronica Hatrip Ronnie. She is here and can answer questions as well.
Thank you, Diana. All right, so we have questions from the commissioners. I'll begin with my left here. Do you have any questions?
Yeah, I just had a question about sort of how the parking lot has been received in the neighborhood. Has it been considered a good neighbor? Have there been any issues? Just
I
curious.
haven't heard of any issues.
Thank you.
Yeah,
Charlie,
I haven't heard any either.
you have any other questions? All right. Commissioner Donaldson
That was my question, so taken care of. Okay.
and Commissioner Young.
Ironically, I use that street a lot, and one condition I run into is that the turning radius to get in and out of that parking lot is tight for those guys. There's a key guard that they must flip open to open up the gate. So that means they've got to get out of their car, then they've got to take this bus and roll it kind of up this little embankments, and starting this heavy truck up to this embankment. So they do it. Holds up cars and stuff like that. If there's a thought to maybe push portion of that fence back a little bit to give them a little bit more turning radius so that they're out of the street, there's plenty of room in that, just make a couple bends in the fence. I don't know how much effect that would be. That would be one of my comments.
At this point, we're asking questions.
And so would that be so you got to turn this around into a question. So would that be something that could be looked at in some sense?
Hello.
Good evening, Commissioners. I'm Veronica Hatrip with the Emeryville TMA. In response to your question, I think the challenge we will have with that is the costly repair to actually shift the access gate, which is electronic. So I think it's not just moving a fence, it's moving the entire system out a little bit further. I do understand the issues that you are noticing, and they are real. Our new site will have a different access system, so we're not hanging out in the middle of the roadway. We're trying to make do with the conditions that we have so we can save our budget on the new bus yard. We have a limited nonprofit budget, as you know. And our cost of the new site just continues to increase. So I think we can maybe look at some options for how we access the gate, and maybe not blocking traffic, and looking at options for that, maybe pulling to the side and opening the gate. I'm not sure if that can be done, but changing the gate out would be quite costly for us to move.
Well, obviously, I didn't realize that was an issue, but yeah, thank you very much. What they've done to that road is they've put a bike lane. They've got bike tubes in there. Then the road's a little narrower. They've got, and so that it's kind of closed. It's kind of a closed road anyway. So. As long as you guys are, aware of it, I think if you don't have to spend any money on any extra, high amounts of money on something, I think I would understand that.
Yeah, and our drivers are very aware of the bike way in that area. We try to avoid Horton at all costs, but so we minimized our access to that road to 53rd to the bus yard, which is just a small jog, and they are aware to be very cautious of bicycle traffic in the area.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. All right. So I want to invite anybody up. Actually, I'm sorry. I want to open up to public comment, and this is a public hearing. So for any members of the public that would like to speak on behalf of this item. All right. See none. We're going ahead and close public hearing and open up to deliberation from the commissioners. And I'll start with Commissioner Young. It sounds like you had a couple more things to say.
Other than the comments that I've already made, I think it's a good thing to have, and I think always welcome Emeryville around into the neighborhood.
Thank you. Commissioner Donaldson?
I have no comments.
No comments? Vice Chair Thompson?
No comments.
All right. I used Emeryville on myself, and I appreciate the service. And as a bicyclist, I can say that I haven't had any interactions with the Emeryville rounds while using Horton. And so I was surprised, and it's still a really nice ride for me as a bicyclist. So what you just spoke to is true in my experience using Horton. Thank you. And your drivers are always so friendly.
Oh my God. Yeah, they're really nice.
Thank you.
Oh my God.
With that, I move approval.
All right. So we have a motion to move approval from Commissioner Donaldson,
I'll second it.
seconded by Vice Chair Thompson. Can we have a roll call vote, please?
Commissioner Donaldson. Commissioners Keller and Sohane are absent. Commissioner Young.
Aye.
Vice Chair Thompson.
Aye.
Chair Guerrero.
Aye.
4 ayes, the application is approved. This decision may be appealed to the City Council within 15 days.
Thank you. All right, moving along. We're going to go ahead and go to item number 8.3. I believe this is Maru, the Versagenics Cannabis Manufacturing and Distribution Facility. Hello.
Good evening, Commissioner, Chair Guerrero, and commission members. This is a application for a cannabis manufacturing facility on 67th Street. A little bit of a background. It was in April of 2017 that the council adopted regulations to allow cannabis retail and manufacturing businesses in certain areas of the city upon the recommendation of the Planning Commission. And this also outlined the permit process for establishing a cannabis business in the city. So all new cannabis businesses are first required to obtain a major use permit. This is followed by an operator's permit that is issued administratively by the police department. So the operator's permit are renewed yearly, and what the police looks at, they do background checks, they look at their security plans, and it is renewed yearly in order to ensure that all the conditions are being met and there are no outstanding violations or complaints that arise from their business there. Currently, we have 5 manufacturing businesses in our city and 1 retail dispensary that is on Pelladieu Street. As of date, we have not received any complaints from any of these cannabis facilities. I've checked, not only have I or the planning department received any, but also not the police department. I checked with them as well. Versagenics started its operations in July 2018 after the commission approved a CUP in December of 2017. And so they've been in operation for about 2.5 years. It operates, it's about 1,000 square foot facility, and it's located at 1320 67th Street. And at this facility, it does manufacturing, distribution, and non-storefront retail sale of cannabis products. What they are proposing is going into another building because their current facility is small. They're running out of space, not only for storage, but also for equipment that they need. And they have managed to acquire a lease for this building here. It's an existing building, and they will be occupying a portion of it. So it's about a 47,000 square foot building, and they will be occupying a little less than 7,000 square feet space in that existing building. They will be manufacturing tinctures, topicals, capsules infused with CBD and THC to create a variety of products, including cosmetics, which will be sold under the brand name Fiore. And they will also be manufacturing supplements to assist elderly and hospice care for conditions such as Alzheimer's, dementia, and cancer recovery. The space will be used in the following way. It's just distributed for different uses, be it manufacturing, machinery, and distribution activities. So this is the site plan. On the top here is 66th Street, and that is where this facility will be gaining entry. And the building itself fronts both 66th and the 67th Street. At this moment, the address is 67th Street, but I think we will be giving this facility another address in order to ensure that the fire responders or other emergency service responders come to the correct location. So 66th Street, and this is the area that they will be occupying. They will be having assigned parking right here for these facilities. This is a floor plan. Again, this area, the rest of the building will be occupied by another use. They are going to be, the Versagenists too will be occupying this space right here. You can see the location of the cameras to give an idea of their sensitivity to security. So this is the building, the existing building as seen from 66th Street, and this is where this facility will be gaining entrance to. And this is the other side on the 67th Street. In terms of hours of operation, the facility will be open from 8 to 8, Monday through Saturday. Specific functions like manufacturing, assembly work would be restricted to 9 to 5. Deliveries to this location and other transportation activities will occur from 8 to 7. Employees are not expected to exceed 10. In terms of waste and odor mitigation, a facility will use standard operation procedures as laid out by state regulations for proper storage, handling of source cannabis materials, and disposal of waste materials. They will also be installing carbon and HEPA filters in the HVAC system to minimize odor emission. They are not proposing any signage on the building at this time or in the future. Just to be clear about what the relationship between the existing facility, which is on 67th Street, and this proposed facility, these will be two standalone facilities that will operate independently and hold separate licenses from both the city as well as the state. There will be some commonalities, but the manufacturing operations at this proposed facility will be different from that occurring at Versagenics 1 facility. This is just to walk you through certain standard conditions of approval that we have now for all the cannabis manufacturing. One is regarding additional permits that they will need from the city. As well as the state license. So like it's noted, they may need a building permit depending on the level of TIs and the type of TIs, of course the operator's permit, a business license, and of course applicable state licenses. There is a condition which says that they need to be under compliance with state law at all times. There is consumption of cannabis is prohibited on the site in the public right-of-way, abutting the property or within 600-foot radius of the property. Odor control, I talked about that. In terms of visibility, again, no cannabis activity will be visible from the exterior of the building or the public right-of-way. And the way the building is, there's really no scope for being able to do for the functions to be visible from the street. So these are the hours of operation that I have already gone through. In terms of conformity to the planning regulations, this lies in the light industrial zone where this is permitted. It is also in the NH, the North Hollis overlay zone. However, this overlay zone really has no land use or design provisions which would be applicable to this proposal. There is no change in FAR, there is no change in building, as there are no changes to the exterior of the building. In terms of auto parking, the requirement is 3 to 6 spaces. They are providing 6 assigned spaces. Bicycle bar parking, the requirement will be 2 short-term and 2 long-term spaces. These are included as condition of approval to ensure that bicycle spaces are installed before they start operation. So standard CUP findings need to be made for this facility, and this is a new industrial activity which will contribute to the economic diversity of the city, and it fulfills a number of goals and policies of the general plan which have been outlined in the staff report. It will be reusing an existing building in an industrial zone which is compatible with the surrounding uses and will not pose a burden on existing utilities. There are conditions of approval that will ensure that the bicycle requirements are adhered to and performance standards regarding odor and noise are met. So that concludes my presentation. We are recommending that the commission approve the project, subject to the conditions of approval. The applicant team is here. They do not have a presentation, I believe, but they are available for questions, and I'm not sure whether they would like to address the commission at this time.
Whenever you'd like to ask, do you have questions for me, or you did an excellent job in presenting the basics? Thank you. We have an opportunity to ask Maru questions at this point, and so if we have questions for staff, this is our opportunity. I'll start with you, Commissioner Young.
I fully understand this project, and I think it's no questions on my behalf.
Any other questions from the commissioners?
Yeah, I have questions about the automated machinery component.
I'm sorry, what?
The automated machinery component. It's sort of mentioned, but it's not described really. Like, what is it? Is it loud? Like, what? Like, tell us about it.
So I'm going to invite the applicant to address the commission and answer that question, if that's
Yes,
okay.
yes, that's totally okay.
Great, thank you.
Absolutely.
So I'm Ryan Burke, and I'm one of the owners and operators of Versogenics Incorporated. And that particular, let me give you a specific example of machinery when it ties into the projects that we're doing. We're working now with 1,000 square feet, and we have about 15 employees, so everybody's all over each other. We have one project called the PharmaCan project, which is actually was noted in the application because we launched it in October. It specifically is geared towards getting specialized medicines to nursing facilities and older folks with dementia, completely on the medical side and completely with a doctor's prescription. So we're growing, we're making this very specialized capsules, and now we're getting to the point we're making all these capsules by hand, and it's getting a little overwhelming. So the next step is to get an automated capsule filling machine. And if I had somebody magically come up and say, oh, Ryan, I'd like to give you this capsule filling machine and it'll make your life easier, we have nowhere to put it. So that type of machinery, bottling machinery. Right now we have a tabletop filler for our lotions. So it's just a little more space. Nothing super automated, nothing noisy. Nothing that runs on exceptional amounts of power. Mostly just like the next step up for where we wanted to be for our kind of our light manufacturing and what we do.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you. Do we have any other questions for the applicant? Well,
Yeah,
I think we might have one more here for Commissioner Donaldson.
Yeah, I would just like to hear a little bit more about the distribution, about what kind of distribution and loading and all that kind
Absolutely.
of
So to give you an example of the 1320, our first project in the small space, we got a micro business, and that allowed us to do 3 separate divisions of cannabis operations. And you could choose from 4, but obviously we wouldn't be cultivating there. So we have manufacturing, distribution, and then our non-storefront retail. Distribution in the cannabis world right now, in our industry, is somewhat of a people don't really know what that means. And the first thing that a distributor does in our industry is they actually are responsible for collecting taxes. And then the second thing that distributors do is they do the final compliance tests from the third-party labs before any products go to retail. So there's 2 different kinds of distributors. There's distributors who are large distributors, and they have lots of different brands, and they go out with sales teams and try to distribute all over California. We're a self-serving distribution. So we use, instead of having trucks, we have a Ford Transit van. That's our dedicated distribution vehicle that we have licensed with the state and insured and have our lock and case in. We're able to do that kind of transportation on our own because we're not doing large-scale transportations of any cannabis product. So the distribution for us allows us to be more vertically integrated. Instead, if we didn't have the distribution component to our operation, we would always have to go to a third party in between our whole process. So we make this product, like we make these PharmaCan capsules I told you about. If we didn't have our own distribution, we'd then have to send the capsules out to a licensed distributor. They would do a compliance test, and then they would get it out to retail. So for our distribution, it's completely self-serving, just to continue the supply chain and to do it in an efficient way. Also, some of the things that we do, because we're a research company, and we're doing R&D on different cannabinoids and different medicines. This has been our goal the whole time. Our formulations are pretty complex, and we like to keep things in-house when we're developing, especially because the end user are people who have compromised immune systems, or it's not just making a cannabis product like some businesses are. We have to really use care in our formulation and make sure that from the SOPs that start this product until it finally reaches the end user, that it is complete, safety first and then compliance. Does that help with the distribution? What other part of the distribution might you not understand?
So it's just more the volume of traffic, whether you need a specific loading area, with that kind of
No,
thing.
and actually, and that's the thing. We're a small to medium manufacturing right now. So when you think about the source material, because that's really what everyone thinks about. So when we're going to make a batch of anything, if we're making tinctures or lotions or the capsules, we purchase source cannabis oil from another licensed manufacturer. Okay, we're not purchasing barrels. We're purchasing liters. So as we expand, we're not taking more deliveries per week. Just hopefully, as we get larger, our orders will be a little bigger. We're not, and all of that is done. All of that traveling is done by appointment. It's not. We don't have lots of trucks coming in on the weekly. We know when we're getting this cannabis oil, as far as the distribution goes, and that only ends up being once every 2 weeks, as far as our shipments go. So we don't create a lot of traffic with our distribution, because that's not really what we do. We use it just to get the products that we need, as opposed to bringing in products and distributing them out to lots of different retail outlets.
So your retail operation is fairly focused and...
Yes, so our retail, to give you an example, so at the 1320 location where we're doing right now, we have the non-storefront retail, so it's our delivery service. And so what we're able to do with the micro business there, this has been one of the reasons we've been able to succeed in 1,000 square feet, is we have this idea that we can create a product and we can run it through all the channels, because we have manufacturing, distribution, we're following the train, we collect taxes, we do the tests, and then we can go to other retail services if we want, but most of the time we just go through our own retail service. So it's somewhat of a vertical integration. It keeps things kind of in our own family. Okay.
Yeah, and I think I had that sort of similar question about the fact that this building is sort of closer to a bikeway, and as much as we like to have occupied buildings, the issue of the bikeway crossing, it's a different setup than on the corner where you are now. So
yeah. So right now, let's say if in 1320, our small spot, right now we have 2 different kinds of deliveries that come in. So other distributors do bring products that we don't distribute. They bring them to the retail division of our small unit.
And do they just pull up on the side of the street?
They pull up in parking. We don't let them double park, but they pull up right there on 13, right at the corner of Hollis and 67th, which is a pretty bad little intersection. Mm-hmm. So with this hopeful expansion over and getting more of the manufacturing and distribution, because we also part of the distribution is storage, and I think I wanted to bring that up. Sometimes when we're making batches of things to be tested, we see at Fiore, the product, we make a tincture and a lotion and a pet tincture and another lotion. So we have to actually start limiting our batch productions, because we don't have anywhere to put the bottles in our small facility. So this expansion really is more about space, being able to expand out and scale up with demand. And then as far as there won't be more deliveries coming up and down 67th, it'll actually be split now. The regulations by the state still say that other distributors do need to go directly to our retail. That's how it's tracked. So those deliveries are always going to be there, and those deliveries are on a low week 2 a week, on a high week 4 a week, and then we schedule them Tuesday, Wednesdays, and Thursdays at lower traffic areas. If we're able to split and we have a lot of the manufacturing activities happening at the 1295 spot, well, any deliveries are now going to go there, where there's a dedicated parking, a dedicated ramp to get in. It's going to take all that off the street, and the only thing that'll be at the 1320 is from other distributors.
Okay.
So we're not adding any more traffic. In fact, we're kind of splitting it between 2 different
And
sectors.
are there, and then maybe this is a Maru question actually, is there any directive, and I know there's an operator's permit and things like that, but I'm trying to understand where any directive would be to say, go to Hollis, don't go to San Pablo. Because that's where you end up crossing a street. Would you ever put that condition?
We have in the past for much larger facilities where the traffic study clearly shows that this is a preferred way of, but for a facility like this, an existing building, we are not recommending that.
Okay. I just wanted to get a sense of your stance on it. Okay.
I have another question for Maru. Maru, in the building's in this interior large building space, and we've got a 90-foot, from one wall to the back wall, and then you've got another 50-some feet to the outside of the back. Is there a recommendation for a second egress, and also is the building sprinkled?
I am not sure whether the building is sprinkled or whether a separation will be required. I will say this, that the remainder of the building will be operated and occupied by an ownership which is not the same, but common ownership. So if once they go for the building permit, that is when those issues will emerge, and if they need to do, and so they will need to comply with the applicable building code requirements regarding separation.
Okay.
It is sprinkler.
Oh, it is sprinkled. Okay.
All right. We have another question here from
How-
Vice Chair.
How high are the ceilings?
It's 20.
Right.
And can you, yes,
I believe it's 24 feet ceilings.
Thank you.
thank you. Do you have any more questions, Commissioner Young? Okay. Commissioner or Vice Chair Thompson?
I just have a couple questions around some of the way that this was written up. And, I really appreciate the rigor in terms of the consistency with the general plan, like sort of answering those questions. But there were some statements here that sort of I raised, sort of made me question things. So I thought I'd ask them. The land use policy, LUP 30, that this applicant, that this, place will provide good quality jobs with the potential for career development, like that, no evidence of that was in the packet. And so do we have any information on that? Like that this is really good quality jobs and there's upward career development?
Well, it doesn't say upward career development, but this is not minimum wage jobs.
Okay.
That's pretty clear in terms of the kind of manufacturing that occurs. It's not like an Amazon kind of fulfillment centers, which are minimum wage jobs. So that is what it is hinting at.
Okay, and that's, I guess I just don't know enough about your operations, so I was sort of thinking, like, do you have college-educated people? I don't know.
Yes.
Can you,
Yes,
thank you.
The manufacturing process right now for cannabis itself is becoming much more than just, putting cannabis in chocolate and calling it something. One of the things that Versagenics has is a entire research and development department. So one of the reasons we come to Emeryville in the first place was because we knew there would be talent here. We're getting into the next kind of field. Everybody has been talking about what cannabinoids can do, and now we're on the CBD. Well, there are lots of different cannabinoids that are coming out. These are high-tech, innovative jobs that we need on the formulation side for creating products. And then these, even, we start talking about machinery. I need people who know how to handle this machinery. And it's interesting because as we're expanding, this isn't getting machinery so that I can cut staff. It's actually, I need both.
Okay.
So it's, but we specifically, every employee that comes on with Versagenics, because we have no corporate backing, we're a family business. Everybody has a 100% chance for upward mobility, and we do that. So when the starting for our business, the starting positions are like a delivery driver, or perhaps at the beginning an assembler of bottles. But that's 90 days, and we would like to see what people can do, and we want people to have upward mobility. We want to employ local people, and we really want to continue to be a good part of the Emeryville business community, not just for us.
Okay. And then the question about serving the business being served by existing water supply. It is an existing building. It has attachment to city services. Do we know anything about the quantity of water it uses? Okay.
Yeah, and I'm sure it varies from use to use, because I think the prior use was a tech. Yeah.
The prior use was a company called New Logic, and I'm not exactly sure what they did, but by their website, they were doing water membrane filtration research, and in fact, throughout the whole building, there's still a lot of kind of leftovers of that. They never seemed to have any problem with water or power or
Okay. Yeah, and I think it's just when I see these sorts of statements, I appreciate that they're coming out of our documents, but then I want the evidence in the packet, and so I'm sort of like what is the range of salaries? How much water are they using? And so when I see statements like that, it'd be great to get some supplementary information. But overall, you're answering my questions, so thank you.
All right, do we have any other questions from the commission at this point? No? All right. I want to open up public hearing for any members of the public that would like to speak on behalf of this item. And if you can introduce yourself, you have 3 minutes to speak, and go right
Good evening,
ahead.
Commissioner, Chair Guerrero, Vice Chair Thompson, Commissioners. My name is George Martin. I'm the owner of the George M. Martin Company on 67th Street. We occupy 5 buildings along that block. We are very familiar with the occupancy of the 2 businesses on 67th Street, the one at 1320 as well as the one next door to us at 1265. I have to say they're almost invisible to me. I wouldn't know they were there. When they first moved into the neighborhood, I was very, very concerned with what was going to go on. And to be honest with you, I don't know that anything's going on at either of those places. So I can say that they don't, at least from my standpoint, for our business, they don't disturb us. I am, as always, concerned about the odor and such. And I just hope that again, the current owners or current occupants don't cause any. And I just hope going forward that they don't create odor, because that would be a problem, because we have about 130 employees, and I don't want any kind of disturbance in that. And add to that, they're going to be mostly on 66th Street anyway, so I say I don't think there'll be any bother to us, and I just wanted to mention that to the commission. So, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Michaels. Are there any other members of the public that'd like to speak? Oh, all right. And if you can fill out a speaker card here, that would help us keep you on the record there. You can find it right there by Andrea. Thank you. All right. Seeing no other members of the public that'd like to speak on this, going to go ahead and close public hearing and open up a deliberation from the commissioners. And I'll begin here to my right with Commissioner Young.
As you know, we have 5 other buildings that are here in Emeryville, and I'm trying to think of, is there a limit of number of cannabis kind of related projects that are here? I think I think for what they're doing in sense of being more professional or being more chemical or being more scientific about this whole thing is a positive move for this particular product for those that are really, really ill and need this product. I will say that the buildings that are near my residence, they have not made any issues as far as I can tell. There was a couple days where there was a police car parked in front of their unit, in front of their building for a week. I wasn't really sure why that was there. I see all the cameras, so is there a sense of security? It brings up a question: is this something people want to rob? Does it bring that kind of awareness in this area? And then the other thing that I kind of wanted to kind of get a touch on is a lot of these places are trying to be very conditional about when they're using it, and it's just like the gentleman who walked up there is it going to lead into a problem? And I would think with this team probably not, but just wanted to bring it out there. That's my thoughts.
Thank you, Commissioner Young. Commissioner Donaldson?
Just a question for Maru. There's been 5 different businesses that have been doing cannabis manufacturing in Emeryville for a year and a half, 2 years now. Have there been any odor complaints?
No, there hasn't been.
Okay, thanks.
And I would like to direct your attention to one of the condition of approval, which if we do receive a complaint, they will be advised to rectify that. And if they don't, then their operating permit would be not renewed or revoked.
All right, thank you. I don't have any other issues with this use. It seems like a use that's suitable for the location as long as they comply with all the regulations that they have, which are abundant. So
Thank you, Commissioner Donaldson. Vice Chair Thompson?
Yeah, I think in general, it's great to see the manufacturing buildings being reused. Emeryville actually has a substantial number of manufacturing buildings, and a lot of that manufacturing is no longer contemporary. So it's good to see contemporary uses. I would say, though, I too sort of share my commissioner's hesitation about, well, at what point is it too many? And at what point is it no longer diversity of uses? It's a lot of cannabis instead. I don't think we're there yet. But I did want to also sort of say that, it makes me wonder as we get more applicants. It's great to hear that there haven't been complaints, and I think in general, I do support the use. I do acknowledge, though, that it is closer to the bike lane. It's a public space that is used by a lot of people, and may have interaction with that, may not, may be invisible to them as well. But I think it's just something that should be watched, and I think the conditional, the order conditions, I'm not using the right term.
Permit?
Not the conditional use permit.
Operator's permit?
The operator's
Oh,
permit,
oh, oh.
yes. We'll also watch that, so I'm comfortable with the process as well.
All right, thank you. I don't have anything else to add outside of what my fellow commissioners have already said. And I would also support moving forward with this conditional use permit and looking for a motion from my commissioners at this point.
I motion move it forward.
All right, we got a motion by Commissioner Young. Looking for a second?
Second.
Seconded by Commissioner Donaldson. Can we have a roll call vote, Charlie?
Certainly. Commissioner Donaldson?
Aye.
Commissioners Keller and Sohani are absent. Commissioner Young?
Aye.
Vice Chair Thompson?
Aye.
Chair Guerrero?
Aye.
4 ayes, the application is approved. This decision may be appealed to the City Council within 15 days. And Chair Guerrero, if I may, I'd just like to make a brief comment concerning proliferation of these uses. I don't know a whole lot about the cannabis manufacturing, but it is my understanding that there is a wide variety of what they do. So we may have, 5 now, and this will be a 6th. But my understanding is that they do a lot of different kinds of things. They don't all do exactly the same thing. And it's kind of like we have a use classification called light industrial. We've got lots of light industrial businesses in the city, and they do lots of different things. They're not all the same. So I think it's the same with cannabis. Just want to point that out.
Thank you for the clarification, Charlie. All right, we're going to go ahead and continue on. We have item 8.4. This is the elimination of minimum parking requirements, and this item is for Charlie.
Thank you, Chair Guerrero. So this is a public hearing on a proposed amendment to the planning regulations to eliminate the minimum parking requirements. This is an overview of what I'm going to talk about. First, some brief background, and then a kind of a high-level summary of what the current requirement is and what the proposed revisions are. Then I'll go into a little more detail about what the elimination of the parking minimums entails. Some discussion about the accessible parking provisions, electric vehicle charging, the proposals regarding bicycle parking, and then other miscellaneous code modifications, and finally our recommendation. A lot of this material was covered previously in the study session that the Planning Commission had. Back in March, about a year ago of 2019, the City Council directed that an ordinance be prepared to eliminate the minimum parking requirement. And staff also identified a number of related issues that needed to be addressed. The Planning Commission held a study session last July, and there were a number of concerns that you all expressed at that study session. One was the ability to require parking if it appeared to be necessary. If we eliminate the minimum, could you require parking? And the answer to that was no. But we have come up with some other provisions that we think will hopefully help to address that concern, which I'll talk about in a minute. Another concern was about accessible parking, and it was pointed out that the building code requires accessible parking as a percentage of parking that is provided. And if no parking was provided, then there would be no accessible parking. So there is a fix for that, we think, which we're going to talk about. Similar concern about electric vehicle charging stations, that if no parking is provided, then no electrical vehicle charging stations would be provided either. That's a different approach, but we have addressed that, we think. There was a concern about having some short-term parking and secure lockers, and also a concern about shared public parking, garages, and transit alternatives. And finally, accommodations for dockless shared mobility like scooters, and also TNCs, Transportation Network Companies, which is a fancy word for ride-sharing services like Uber and Lyft. So the City Council then held a study session in September, and we conveyed to the Council the Commission's concerns, and we had a pretty robust discussion at the Council about your concerns and about their own thoughts on this. And at the end of that study session, they directed that the parking minimum shall be eliminated, that accessible parking should be provided based on the estimated parking demand, even if no other parking is provided, that you would still have accessible parking based on what the demand would be. The bicycle parking requirements are to be uncoupled from the automobile parking requirements. And the other provisions that the Commission identified regarding short-term parking, scooters, TNCs, and so forth would be deferred for now, pending future review by the Bicycle Pedestrian Advisory Committee. Finally, regarding the shared public parking garages and transit alternatives, it was noted that the planning regulations are not really the tool for addressing those things, but they may be considered in the future as separate efforts. So now, just regarding how the parking requirements currently work, if you think about parking as a spectrum that goes from 0 to infinity, basically, we start with what we call the estimated parking demand. And the estimated parking demand is what the research says is what a particular use would be expected to have a demand for. There's a big table in the planning regulations that lists every single use classification and what the estimated parking demand for each one is. For example, a very typical estimated demand is 3 spaces per 1,000 square feet. A lot of different uses have that estimated demand. Our current regulations say that the amount of parking that must be provided is a minimum of 33% below the demand, and the maximum is 10% above the demand. So a developer could provide parking anywhere in this green area from the minimum to the maximum. And if they wish to provide more or less parking, more than the maximum or less than the minimum in this yellow range, they can do that as well, but they need to have a conditional use permit normally from the Planning Commission in order to do that. What this proposed amendment would do is that it would eliminate the minimum, so that this green area would now extend all the way down to 0. So the minimum would be 0, we would still have the maximum, so the amount of parking that a developer can provide is anywhere from 0 up to the maximum. You would still have a conditional use permit to provide parking above the maximum. The new feature that has been added to address the concern about, what if a developer decides to go all the way down here to 0, is a provision that the decision-making body, the City Council or the Planning Commission or the staff, whoever it is, may, if appropriate, include a condition of approval to require measures to reduce parking demand, such as a TDM, a Transportation Demand Management Plan, or something that would require the developer to make a best effort to try to reduce parking demand and promote alternative modes of transportation. That could include an annual report to the city and periodic corrective measures if it doesn't seem to be meeting its goals, or whatever. Whatever the decision-making body deems appropriate can be included as a condition of approval to address the parking demand. Now, to go in a little more detail about the parking minimums, currently section 94404G of the regulations stipulates the minimum and maximum number of spaces, and 94404H is the findings that are required to grant a use permit to either exceed the minimum or the maximum. The minimum requirements, of course, would be changed to 0, and the findings to provide parking below the minimum would be deleted, and then all of these sections would be consolidated and renumbered. There would be a new renumbered section 94404G that would allow projects providing less parking than the estimated demand to be conditioned to require measures to reduce parking demand, such as alternative modes, modified work hours, and telecommuting, which is what I just talked about. Also, the provisions regarding the transit hub overlay zone would be amended because it also addresses the minimum parking. As you know, the transit hub overlay zone reduces all parking to 50% below what it would otherwise be. And similarly, there are parking provisions for accessory dwelling units which will need to be amended as well. I would note that the next item on your agenda is amendments to the ADU regulations, and we have tried to be careful to make sure that this same section 951407, which is also in that ordinance, is identical in this ordinance to that ordinance. So both ordinances would say the same thing regarding ADU parking. Regarding accessible parking, that's mandated by the building code. It has to be a percentage of the total amount of parking that is provided. And what we would do here is this section 94403C would now be modified for new construction that has an estimated demand of 26 spaces or more. And such projects would have to provide accessible parking based on the estimated demand, even if no other parking were provided. For example, the building code requires 4 accessible parking spaces for 100 total spaces. If the estimated parking demand of a new building is 100 spaces, the project would have to provide at least 4 accessible spaces, even if it didn't provide any other parking. So you'd have a new building, and it would have 4 accessible parking spaces, and that's it, no other parking, based on the fact that its estimated demand was 100 spaces. But to not unduly overburden small projects and also the reuse of existing buildings, this requirement would not apply either to existing buildings or to new buildings that have an estimated demand of 25 spaces or less, and that's about a 10,000 square foot building. So this accessible parking requirement would only apply to new buildings of more than 10,000 square feet. Existing buildings and smaller new buildings would not be covered. But of course, any building would have to provide parking in conformance with the building code if it, accessible parking in conformance with the building code if it did provide any other parking. And I believe it's, the threshold is 25 spaces, up to 25 spaces requires 1 accessible space. So if they provide any parking at all, up to 25, they'd have to have at least 1 accessible space. And then if they provide more, it would just be whatever the building code requires. For EV charging stations, the similar concern was raised by the Commission, as you may recall. However, it was noted at the City Council study session that EVs are still automobiles. And the basic goal here is to try to reduce use of automobiles. So they weren't inclined to give special treatment to EVs. So there would be no requirement to provide EV charging stations if no other parking were provided. However, the proposal is to pretty substantially increase the requirements for EV charging stations above what we currently have, assuming other parking is being provided. And this requirement would be based on the California Green Building Standards Code, also known as CalGreen, and it would therefore automatically increase with every 3-year building code adoption cycle without requiring an amendment to the planning regulations. The building code, as you may know, is readopted every 3 years, and every 3 years the CalGreen code requirements for EV charging stations goes up a notch. It went up 3 years ago, and it went up 3 years before that, and when the most recent code was adopted, it went up then. So they're constantly ratcheting it up. We're going to tie the requirement in the planning regulations to whatever the Green Building Code says, and then we don't have to amend the planning regulations because it will just automatically increase. The requirement in the planning regulations would be tied to the Tier 2 voluntary measures, which is the highest CalGreen standard, and would be level 2 or better chargers, which is opposed to the slower level 1 chargers. And I would note that the CalGreen requirements are not mandatory requirements for cities to adopt. But we are tying our planning regulations to the voluntary provisions in the Cal Green Standard. They will become mandatory under the planning regulations. Also, it was pointed out at the Planning Commission study session that the Cal Green requirements are only for EV capable spaces, meaning they have to have the infrastructure installed, but they don't actually have to have the EV charging equipment installed. So the city requirement would be they have to actually install the equipment, which is known as EVSE, electric vehicle supply equipment. It would have to be installed, and then all of the other spaces would have to be EV capable. This would be our requirement. The raceways, i.e. the conduits and the panels for the EV capable spaces also would have to be 50% larger than the Cal Green requires. So for example, if Cal Green would require a 1-inch conduit, our EV capable spaces would have to have a 1.5-inch conduit. And these provisions are based on a recommendation from the building division and from their consultants, WC3, West Coast Code Consultants, who are somewhat experts in this area, and they're the ones who recommend this 50% increase in size in anticipation of larger EV equipment in the future. So for example, the current Cal Green requires 9 EV capable spaces for 100 total spaces. Our current requirement, by the way, is only 3% of spaces, and it's only for apartment buildings and hotels. So this would be for everything. So Cal Green requires 9 for every 100 spaces in a non-residential building, and Emeryville would require those 9 spaces to actually have the equipment installed and the other 91 spaces to be EV capable with 50% larger raceways and panels. Moving on to bicycle parking, it's currently tied to automobile parking actually provided, and so the revised regulations would uncouple that. For non-residential uses, both the long-term, which is secure interior parking, and the short-term bike racks parking would be 1 space for every 10 spaces of estimated auto demand, regardless of whether or not any auto parking is actually provided. So for example, if the estimated demand were 50 spaces, then you'd have to have 5 long-term bike spaces and 5 short-term bike spaces. For residential uses, long-term parking would remain 1 space per unit, and short-term would be 1 space for every 20 units instead of what we have now, which is 1 for every 4 auto visitor spaces. Because if they decide not to provide any auto visitor spaces, then you wouldn't have to have any long-term or short-term bike parking. So we're uncoupling that and just making it 1 for every 20 units. And the decision makers, whoever they may be, staff, council, commission, would be allowed to make modifications to the parking design standards as appropriate. The long-term parking, also there's a provision that the long-term parking can be substituted 1-to-1 for short-term spaces for a non-residential use of 3,000 square feet or less if long-term parking, bike parking is not feasible because of lack of space. So we do have, sometimes we have a situation where there's a very small retail store and they have a long-term bike parking space and they just don't have any place in this little store to put a long-term bike parking space. So what we're suggesting is that they just add an additional short-term space on the rack outside. As I said before, the Planning Commission recommendations for short-term bike lockers and scooters and TNCs would be deferred to future BPAC review. Other code modifications would include elimination of any mandatory code language such as parking requirements and required parking. So in the red line version that's attached to your resolution that's in your packet, a number of those modifications are simply to change the wording slightly so it doesn't refer to requirements anymore. There'd also be elimination or modification of certain provisions related to substitutions or credits for required parking, since parking would no longer be required. Modification of provisions related to existing parking to allow it to be reduced or eliminated. Additional modifications to implement the elimination of mandatory parking and some other miscellaneous cleanup measures. So that's kind of the overview of the main points. Our recommendation is that you open the public hearing and take testimony, close the public hearing, consider the staff report and resolution, and then adopt the resolution and forward your recommendation to the City Council. that concludes my presentation. I'd be happy to respond to any questions.
Thank you, Charlie. Do we have any questions here from the commission for Charlie at this time? I have a question from Commissioner Donaldson.
At one point you were saying that the council said that in terms of shared parking arrangements, that wasn't something that planning regulations were the appropriate tool for. Is that just market driven as well then?
Well, I want to make a distinction by shared parking. We were talking about city parking garages. That's what I meant when I said that. And I believe that's what the commission was referring to. There was some discussion at the commission about the city should build some garages to, allow parking. So that was what was intended. And that would be like a capital improvement program project, not something you do through planning. The planning regulations do have provisions about shared parking. It's a different thing.
Okay.
It's sharing parking, but sharing private parking between two different uses.
Right.
And that's still, we wouldn't be changing that provision.
Okay. I had another question, but I have to look for it. So if anyone else wants to talk.
You have any questions, Commissioner Tom?
No questions for Charlie. No, thank you.
Okay.
Was there any discussion if we are eliminating the minimum for automobile vehicle parking and we're keeping this, why are we keeping the same standards for bicycle parking? Shouldn't we be upping the bicycles if we're lowering the other types of transportation options?
Well, that would be something to consider. What we're doing is trying to uncouple the bicycle parking from the auto parking, so the bicycle parking won't go down when the auto parking goes down. I guess it's a sort of a different question as to whether we want the bike parking to go up as the bike parking goes down. I would say that would probably be something that council would also want to defer to BPAC review. We will be, over the next couple of years, embarking on an update or really a new pedestrian bicycle plan, and which may have recommendations and policies regarding bike parking. But yeah, I mean, that's really a policy question. So if you want to suggest that to the council, it's certainly your prerogative.
And the loading zone regulations are not changed by this at all, right?
No.
No. Okay.
Charlie, do you know when this might go to the BPAC for review?
This is not proposed to go to the BPAC for review right now.
Okay.
It would be going to, I think the council has a sort of a sense of urgency about this.
Got it.
And it will be going to the whole concept would be going to the BPAC review, certainly as part of the PED bike plan update, if not sooner, but not right away.
Navar?
Can I speak to that?
Absolutely.
So BPAC did look at these changes a while ago, and we talked briefly about it. I don't recall which meeting that was, and I don't recall specifically what came of that, but there was definitely discussion about how this was providing some flexibility to addressing existing bicycle parking needs, and also what Charlie mentioned about the upcoming PED bike plan update and how that would be further opportunity. So I don't recall off the top of my head there being any concerns raised with this. And by decoupling it from the parking and having it based consistently on estimated demand, it would kind of effectively be increasing the bicycle parking supply compared to what the current regulations are.
Thank you, Navar. All right.
So I have one question, actually.
You got it.
So this actually is sort of related to some other issues that have come up. Just this question about the market mechanism that creates parking. I mean, some of the reason why parking was ever embedded with buildings was because that would allow a market mechanism to create parking. So whenever someone created a building, they'd also create parking. So I guess I sort of got to that question about saying, what is the market? I mean, I know we've sort of said city parking garages are outside that. They have a different market mechanism. This gets into the policy question. The question about bikes, what is the market mechanism to increase the number of bike parking spaces? And so I think that, I don't know if that's been a discussion point. So my question is, has that been a discussion point? It's sort of mentioned as maybe it's policy, maybe it's beyond the scope of this conversation. If it is, where has it come up? would it be in some other conversation? Do you have a sense of that?
Are you talking about bicycle parking?
No, I'm just talking about the
Market
the
issue.
market mechanism to create alternatives to the car.
Oh. Well, I mean, my sense from developers that I talk to, and I talk to quite a few of them, is that they want to provide parking. And if we go back to, hang on, this here, they will be able to provide parking anywhere in this range, but they don't have to provide any parking under if this code amendment is approved. And so therefore it will become a market decision as opposed to a government regulation as to whether they provide any parking or not within this range. And pretty much every developer I talk to wants to provide parking. Because for a variety of reasons, but two big reasons are, one, they feel that they can't market the space without parking. And in fact, I've heard more than one developer tell me, I don't really think the parking is needed, but I can't get any tenants in this space if I don't provide it. So I need to provide parking. So that's one reason. And the other reason is for financing. A lot of banks just won't finance a project if it isn't parked, because they think it's not a viable project without parking. The problem we run into, or the issue we run into more often, is that we don't allow them to provide as much parking as they want to provide. So we have two big development projects right now, Ani and 5850 Shellmound, both of which want to provide more parking than our maximum. So that's the issue we run into. I mean, it's certainly possible in the future that someone will come in with a big new building and think that they can market it without any parking. I guess those kinds of things are being built or proposed, certainly in big cities like Oakland and San Francisco, right next to BART stations and things. And that would be allowed under this regulation, but I don't think it's real likely. So that's the extent of the discussion we've had about the market mechanism for this.
Okay.
Do you have any more questions from the commission for Charlie?
No, I'll just go forward.
Okay. So at this, we have one more question from Commissioner Donaldson.
Yeah, I do have one more question about this, the thing about the public use of private garages, because one of the general plan policies is that the city supports public parking strategies such as public parking and public use of private garages to maintain a parking space utilization of 85%. Has there been any recent looking at how much the private garages are actually used?
I think the short answer is no. As you know, as I mentioned in my director's report, the City Council just approved a contract to finally implement the parking management plan. That parking management plan has been, paid parking plan has been in the works for 10 years or more probably. And as a part of that effort early on, I recall there were some studies done of all of the private parking lots and garages, and it was noted that they were pretty much underutilized, but that the city didn't really have any control over that or a real mechanism for dealing with that. And I think that issue has just not really been studied much further, largely because it's private property, and we'd have to brainstorm some whole new paradigm for how we figure out how to force these folks to open up their garages to, or parking lots to allow the public to use it, which is a pretty thorny question. So we haven't gone there, at least not yet.
Thanks.
All right. I don't see any other questions here from the commission. So at this point, I'd like to open up public hearing for any members of the public who'd like to speak on behalf of this item. All right.
Thanks, Nathan.
Hello.
Hello. Good evening, commissioners. I'm Nathan Landau. I'm a planner at AC Transit. I'm happy to come back to Emeryville. I've been in a lot of good discussions here. I'm here to support the idea of eliminating parking minimums. I think that that moves us towards recalibrating the market, as Commissioner Thompson was talking about, and it allows buildings to be built without this sort of baggage of parking, and it allows developers who are willing to experiment to do that as they've done in other cities, and to create buildings for residents that don't want to have a lot of cars. There is at least a mini trend towards eliminating minimum parking requirements. We've seen it in all or part of San Francisco, Oakland. Berkeley is now considering it for residential buildings. And I think it really does allow things to open up and not assumptions to be made about how much parking has to be there. So one of the only other major thing I want to say, well, the other thing I should say is that we've had a good working relationship with Emeryville. I don't want to miss saying that. One of the things that, I see that the ordinance has been carefully crafted to allow possible TDM requirements if there's less parking provided than the calculated demand. And we AC Transit would ask that if you get into that kind of situation, that you really seriously consider requiring the developer to provide residents or workers with bus passes, and that can be a TDM measure. It extends Emery-Go-Round. It would allow people to commute to San Francisco on Trans-Bay buses with those passes, which of course a lot of people in Emeryville do. So I think that could be a further extension of this approach. So thank you, commissioners, and hope you were able to come to a good resolution here.
Thank you, Mr. Landell. All right. Are there any other members of the public who'd like to speak on behalf of this item? And I don't see anybody else here in the audience. And so I'm going to go ahead and close public hearing at this time and open it up for deliberation from the commissioners. And I'll begin here on my left with Vice Chair Thompson.
Yeah, in general, I think I really support this this initiative. It's good to see the comprehensive nature through, that it's working through all of the regulations. It also shows, and I said this in the last session, that it shows sort of how embedded it is in our regulatory structure. So it's nice to see it being pulled out of that. I like the decoupling that has happened, and I know we brought that up last time this came before us. So it's great to see things based on demand and still requiring accessibility and bike parking. I think the EV strategy is also a good one as well. So those are my comments.
Thank you. Commissioner Donaldson?
Basically agree with that. I think that the EV recommendations are really good ones, and the uncoupling is a good thing. I think that it's good that the bike ped plan is going to be updated and that the BPAC is going to be looking at that kind of provision and uncoupling the bike parking from the automobile parking will make that an easier process, I think. So I'm okay with that.
Thank you. Commissioner Young?
I'm completely kind of mixed about this. Maybe I'm a little too old school, but I have some issues with just some practicality of this whole thing. I mean, I live in a place where there's an HOA, and we're not permitted to have our bikes parked on our balconies, and we're not allowed to have our bikes. And if we take our bikes outside, they get stolen. So it forces us to have bikes inside, which means that we have to have larger spaces and things. That's a big shift on what our expectations are going to look like in the future. I think uncoupling the parking requirements for bikes and cars really need to maintain themselves, because we don't really have an answer here. There's not really truly AC Transit's great, and so is Emery-Go-Round. But I mean, if I wanted to go to Marin, I need a car. There is no real and to assume that I'm going to take a car to Pleasant, I'm going to take a bus or something to Pleasanton at 2 o'clock in the morning or 1:30 in the morning if I have a night job, or if I'm an Uber driver and I want to be an Uber driver and I live in this place and I don't have a spot to park a car, I'll get a car and I'll park it on the street, which then puts more pressure on everybody else. In terms of this EV changes, I mean, yeah, you can make raceways 50% larger, but I'll tell you what, don't tell the electricity and they won't know. And I think the thing is that there's a sense of load that power and trying to have all these expectations to have larger EVs, well, it's kind of a semi snow job, I think. It's not really EV. We have cars that run electrical, they'll run all day. BMW does it, Volvo will do it, Porsches will do it. I mean, they don't really need to have, so the manufacturers aren't going to really produce these extra ultra power. Maybe a little bit more, but not as much as they're thinking. Also, I've been to places where they had charging stations. You go to Alameda and you see all these guys with their Teslas, and they're parked there in front of the grocery store, and they're trying to pull in for their Teslas. You're waiting in lines, worse than getting gas. You put gas in and you just leave. You just have to. The whole thing about parking is that, people now may trend to do something, but it's a short period of time. We don't really know. I mean, we don't really know if these young people are going to grow up and want to have cars in the future, or if we'll actually get all this infrastructure rectified in the first place. We might. I know that I'm getting older. Bikes are not fun for me, and I love bikes. I have 2 BMX bikes, and I have a hard time riding them. I'm 62, and I still have them, and they look great. But I just think that if I move to a place and to realize, like, okay, now, so I'm having a little bit of a hard time with this, and I'm thinking that's kind of my reasons for it all.
Thank you, Commissioner Young. All right, so in terms of the responses that we received from the staff that addressed our comments from the last study session we had, I appreciate the direction that we're taking. I think that decoupling bikes from the required parking makes sense. EV charging stations, I'm seeing a new EV charging station pop up at the Powell station just within the last week for Teslas, and so I feel like that's a direction that things are taking for vehicles. Myself being a pedestrian and a bicyclist, and I use public transportation, I'm really interested in how the large projects that we mentioned earlier that are asking for more parking are actually in transit hub overlays. And so that's something I just want to put out there in terms of, like, what does that mean? And what are we doing to really to make that a transit friendly corridor, and that being in one of my neighborhoods that I live in. And so the direction that we're taking here with this, I support everything that's written here in the conditional use or the conditional use permits. I don't have any other feedback to give outside of what my commissioners had said. I do agree with Commissioner Donaldson and Vice Chair Thompson, and I invite you to take a bike ride with me sometime, Commissioner Young. I'll show you around town.
It hurts. It hurts. It just pedaling hurts. We have a lot of hills here. I exercise on elliptical for an hour a day, and I get on a bike and it hurts.
Okay. There's so many options, and I'd love to show you around town on a scooter maybe too.
I will not ride a scooter.
All right.
I'd rather take the bus.
And so at this time, I want to go ahead and see if there's a motion to move forward with this from the commissioners.
I have an observation, which is that I think that the market is going to take care of this stuff. The transportation landscape is changing quickly, and we don't know what's going to be happening in 5-10 years with the types of automated vehicles and how people are really going to get around. But I think the market will take care of it on the larger projects, and that having no minimum is really, that's not what developers are going to want to do. I think it's going to have the most impact in the lower density residential neighborhoods, the medium density residential neighborhoods. For example, next to me there are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 units without parking, and there's about 12 people living in them, and a lot of them need cars and commute, and the street parking is pretty bad. And I know that that's also the case over in the Triangle neighborhood in some places, that there are a lot of people in houses where there is more likely to be less off-street parking provided and more congestion on streets, which ends up with people driving around in circles and driving around blocks looking for parking, which is a problem. So I am willing to go forward with this because I think that that's the direction that things are going, but I think there is an issue there too.
So do you need a vote?
We need a motion.
Do we need a vote?
We need a motion first before we vote.
I would like to motion to move this forward.
All right. We have a motion from Vice Chair Thompson. Looking for a second. All right. I can second that. I want to go ahead and second.
All right, moved by Vice Chair Thompson, seconded by Chair Guerrero. You ready to vote?
Ready to vote, Charlie?
Commissioner Donaldson?
Aye.
Commissioners Keller and Sohani are absent. Commissioner Young?
Nay.
Vice Chair Thompson?
Aye.
And Chair Guerrero.
Aye.
3 ayes, 1 no. We will forward your recommendation to the City Council.
Thank you. All right. At this point, I think I want to take a recess for 5 minutes. We're going to go ahead and take recess, and right now it's 8:16. Want to go ahead and call us to the meeting's order? We're back at 8:23.
Thank you, Navarro, for setting this up.
And this is, or 8:21, I'm sorry. And this is item 8.5, accessory dwelling units. And Diana, I'll let you go ahead and start with your presentation.
You may recall we were here a year ago doing this. The state seems to be on a wanting to do every year something to make it easier to build granny units. So this year, the new state laws say that cities have to allow a junior accessory dwelling unit, which is a unit that has a separate entrance but can share a bathroom with another unit. The idea is if in a single family house mostly, you would add a room like that. It could be the city must allow an ADU on a lot with more than one existing unit. That's a new thing. We must allow certain multiple ADUs in certain conditions. We have to allow parking in setbacks, and people who have existing ADUs can request a 5-year delay in building code enforcement except for health and safety issues. We may not require owner occupancy of ADU or the larger unit. That's a change. It is still required of the junior ADU. We may not require correction of non-conforming zoning conditions. That's mostly site dimensions. We may not require them to meet the lot size standard for the zone or to replace parking when a garage or carport is converted or replaced by an ADU. And we are not allowed to allow them to meet setback requirements when they convert an existing structure to an ADU. Number of ADUs on a lot is complex. On a lot with one single unit, they can add one ADU and one junior ADU. They can add one or the other in the single unit structure, and they can add one detached. According to the state, they can combine the junior ADU with the detached ADU, and they didn't address attached but not within, so we're proposing adding that to our ordinance. On a lot with more than one existing dwelling unit, in portions of the existing structures that are not used as livable space, like boiler rooms, storage spaces, things like that, they can add at least one ADU or 25% as many units as exist on the site. So if you have a 100-unit apartment complex, you can convert the parking garage to 25 units. And they also are allowed to have 2 ADUs detached from the existing structure, which would probably more likely happen on the smaller properties. The size of ADUs is even more complex in the state laws. They have 3 different rules. The default maximum is 1,200 square feet. The city may limit that's for detached 1,200. And the city may limit attached ADUs to 50% of the principal units. Cities may set an overall maximum of 850 square feet, 1,000 for 2 bedrooms or more. But the city has to approve an 800 square foot, 16 foot tall, 4 foot setbacks unit, waiving standards if necessary to do that. So we looked at all this and said, why don't we just say not larger than the largest existing unit and waive planning requirements if we have to make it 800 square feet. The minimum size of ADU, the state law actually says you can't set a size that would keep them from having an efficiency. An efficiency has to have a 150 square foot great room plus a bathroom and a kitchen and a closet. So we said in our ordinance the minimum is 150 square feet. It'll really be a little bit bigger, what they'll have to build. And we are going to tell people when they come in that there are building code requirements they need to think about pretty quick. And that's one of them. The maximum size of a junior ADU is 500 square feet. Short-term rental, Airbnb. Short-term rental is defined as rental for 30 days or less. I think it's less than 30 days. Emeryville allows that in detached dwelling units, even if there's more than one on a lot, for the entire unit for up to 90 days a year or part of the unit anytime if the occupant is present with a permit. The state now requires ADUs that are permitted under that 800 square foot rule to be rented for 30 days or more, and we will not be able to keep track of which ones those are. So we propose that we prohibit short-term rental in all ADUs. Common interest developments, homeowners associations, CC&Rs, may not prohibit or unreasonably restrict ADUs and junior ADUs. We want to let everybody know about that, but cities don't regulate that, so it's not in our proposed ordinance. There is a provision that cities may allow separate sale of ADUs that are developed by nonprofits as affordable with 45-year affordability restrictions. And at first we were thinking, well, that might help us meet this other requirement that the next housing element has to include a plan to incentivize and promote affordable ADUs. And this is a summary of what the Housing Committee had to say about the 4 choices that we have. There's a lot the state says we have to do, we have no choice, but there's 4 things we get to decide. And one of them was, should we allow separate sale of ADUs? Well, the Housing Committee said that would preclude more efficient development of affordable units. That in Emeryville, it doesn't really make much sense to do that as a way of building affordable units, that an affordable housing nonprofit would probably just turn it into a 6-unit apartment or something. So they didn't think that that was something we should allow. They did agree with the other 3 ideas, and that makes sense to me. They agreed with the applying the state rules that they made for detached units to attached units about how many units can be on a lot. And when I went to the Housing Committee, we were still thinking 1,200 square foot limit, so they agreed to that. And then later we thought of making it just the size of the principal unit. So I would imagine they would agree with that, but we didn't ask them that. And that's to avoid the confusion of all these different size limits. We're going for really the simplest, easiest to administrative, most permissive approach. And the other one is to prohibit short-term rentals in all ADUs, so we don't have to try to figure out which ones were approved how. So to make the findings, to amend the planning regulations, you have to find that the proposed amendment is consistent with the general plan, which it is because it helps improve implement housing goals, especially about mix of housing types. The proposed amendment is necessary for public health, safety, and welfare. It is because it would expedite development of housing where the infrastructure is, and housing units are needed to mitigate the housing crisis. The proposed amendment has been reviewed in compliance with the California Environmental Quality Act. This year, there is a new Public Resources Code section specifically saying that CEQA does not apply to ADU ordinances, so we're using that. And the 4th finding is about changes to zoning maps, which we're not doing. So staff recommends that the Planning Commission recommends City Council adoption of the proposed amendments to the planning regulations and building regulations as detailed in the resolution. And we want to make sure, see if you agree with us about these 4 things that the state gives us a little choice about. Separate sale of affordable ADUs, not allowing them, allowing ADUs up to the size of a principal unit, prohibiting short-term rentals in all ADUs, and applying the state rules for the number of detached units to the attached but not inside units. So that completes my report, and I'll be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Diana. So we have questions from the commission. I'll begin here on my left with Vice Chair Thompson.
No questions at this time.
No questions? No questions from Commissioner Donaldson?
On the junior ADUs, what are their minimum requirements? The 150 square feet?
No.
No.
An efficiency, as defined by the state health code, has 150 square foot great room plus a kitchen, bathroom, and closet. Junior ADU, there's no size minimum. It has to have a separate door, and I believe it has to have some not very well defined kitchen equipment, but it can share the restroom with other people in the building.
Okay. And the reason for prohibiting the short-term rentals would just be that it'd be a nightmare to administer, is that it?
Pretty much, yes. That's one thing where what's simpler is not more permissive.
Mm-hmm.
So it means that people who live in these ADUs it would not be legal for them to rent it out while they go on vacation.
It's an Airbnb.
you have any other
That's it.
questions?
That's it.
Okay. You have any questions, Commissioner Young?
Yeah, on an ADU, is there a requirement for PG&E to have a separate PG account? And also, are they forced to have separate mailboxes, like separate addresses, like 7344A, 7344B? How does that? And the other one I'd like to just kind of bring up at the same time is we still would have a design review on our side. So if someone came with an ADU and we could reject the design?
No. ADUs must be allowed ministerially.
So is there, so let's say someone had, I hate stucco, but let's say someone had a stucco home and they put an ADU in the back that was made out of metal, or vice versa. Could we make a call on what that would look like?
Could staff make a call on
Could
what that?
staff make a call? If someone had a flat roof and an ADU came in with a pitched roof, or vice versa, do we have any call on that? The other thing too that brings to mind too is that eventually it starts to be an issue when the ADU's front door on a detached building or detached unit is not seen from the street.
Right.
So what happens is it opens up a scary situation for people who are either in the house or next door. And so do we have any situation on that? So those are my questions.
I think that Charlie has an answer for your first question, Commissioner Young.
Well, I'll take a stab at it.
Okay.
As Diana said, ADUs by state law are required to be by right uses. They're required to be approved administratively. And that's not new. That's in our current code already. We do have a provision in our current code that talks about design review being done as part of the ministerial approval, which is a little tricky because design review is by nature discretionary and not really ministerial. So what we've done in this amendment is to say that ADUs are subject to any objective design review standards that we may have. Now, an objective standard is one where the city has adopted a standard that is easily measurable by anybody, that any reasonable person could look at the design and either check a box, yes, it meets it, or no, it doesn't meet it. It's not where it's a judgment call as to, gee, this is compatible or not, so it's just a straight up yes or no. So for example, in your question about a flat roof as opposed to a gable roof.
Or a yurt, for that matter. Yeah.
Well, the example of the flat roof, if we had a objective design standard that the city council had adopted that said all ADUs shall have flat roofs, and somebody brought in a design for an ADU that had a gable roof, we'd say no. The objective design standard that our city council has adopted says it has to have a flat roof. Now, I'm not saying that we'll ever do that, but that's just an example of an objective standard. So we are in this situation with ADUs where it's really tough because our current design guidelines are not particularly objective. Some of them are. Most of them aren't. We haven't really gone through the exercise of saying these are objective, these aren't objective. However, Diana has gotten the City A grant under SB 2 from the state for us to develop objective standards. So over the next year or so, we will be developing objective standards because it's not just ADUs. There's a lot of these recent housing laws that are riddled with references to objective standards. So we're kind of on the hook to come up with some objective standards, not just for this, but for everything. So we're going to hire a consultant who is going to help us go through our current zoning and our current guidelines and then maybe embellish with additional stuff so we can come up with a real good solid set of objective standards where you can just go through a checklist and say, yes, it meets these, no, it doesn't meet these, whatever.
And to the very specific question around materiality, I mean, would you have a materials list of yes and no?
You could.
Yeah.
That is possible. I'm not sure if the Planning Commission and Council is ultimately going to want to. Diana has a...
Well, based on what Commissioner Young was saying, we could consider whether or not we want to have an objective standard that says that the ADU is the same materials and the same roof shape, general roof shape as.
You could, you just
Single
have to
unit.
make sure that it is in fact objective. Like, for example, if you say it has to have the same general roof shape, well, that could, you know, what if
That
the,
could, yeah.
what if the main house has a roof like this and the ADU has a roof like that? Is that the same general roof shape? I don't know, you know, you have to really be clear that it's something that's either yes or no.
Could it pass a vote by several people, where then if
No.
it did pass a vote, you could have a yes or no?
No. Everybody has to be able to say, yes, it meets that, no, it does. It's like setbacks, you know? A
Right.
setback is a very objective standard. Your side setback is 3 feet. Is it 3 feet? No, it's only 2 feet. That's not 3 feet. No. Is it 4 feet? Yeah, that's more than 3 feet. Okay, so it passes. It has to be something like that.
Well, and I wondered around the materiality, just because it is in everything. I mean, there's discussion of materials in the general plan, there's discussion of materials in the design guidelines, there's discussion of materials in sign guidelines.
Yeah.
And, you know, and yet it's somehow not objective, and I'm like, well,
Well, yeah,
except
a
for,
lot of what's in the general plan and design guidelines and zoning is not objective.
Yeah, no, there's a lot of other things that are,
Right.
less clear, that's for sure.
Well, yeah, I mean, a lot of it is a judgment call, but I think what Diana said about, you know, that it has to be the same material as the main house, that strikes me as pretty objective.
Well, here,
We're getting a bit of feedback, so I just want to make sure that can we
Yeah,
turn
we're
down
still
the-
into
the
questions,
mic-
aren't we?
Yeah,
We
yeah,
are in
sorry.
questions.
We're questions.
And the feedback that I was mentioning also is there's some like feedback from the microphones again.
Oh, that
kinds
kind
of
of
feedback.
feedback.
And so there we go. Thank you.
there was still one more question in terms of the mailbox and the front door.
Oh, I think Navarre might have had a thought on that.
So, whenever new units come online, that's handled by the building division. You have to assign addresses to it. It's an emergency response issue. The location of mailboxes isn't designated like you have to have a mailbox at this particular location, but then when you have a new address, people put up mailboxes. Does that?
No, no, close.
Okay, let's get there.
Close. Okay, so, and it's just probably the way I'm explaining it. I speak like Yoda sometimes. Let's assume you have two buildings. One's existing and one's the proposed ADU, and what generally you want to have a PG&E box for either one of them. They're going to get separate bills, and that's kind of understood. The thing about that is that then would you be required to force them to have their own address on that separate unit, even though the building might belong to a person? Or see, you see where I'm getting at? It's kind of like it's kind of like a duplex. How do you handle that?
Well, I think that's
Each
what
unit
Navarre
has its
said.
own address. I would think the residents would want that.
It could be Unit A, Unit B, whatever, but as Navarre said, it's really for emergency response. The police and fire and EMT folks need to know where to go to.
Well, maybe I answer my own question then.
Right.
Okay.
Concerning the location of the front door, we don't have any requirements about that currently. If, when we go through the subjective standard exercise, if that's something that we want to add, we certainly can do that.
Right. There's some Berkeley ordinances that talk about that sort of thing. It's got to be lighted. It's got to be able to see the numbers out, that kind of stuff. So may look at that. All right. That's my questions for now.
Thank you, Commissioner Young. We have another question from Commissioner Donaldson.
On the second bullet there, allowing ADUs up to the size of the principal unit, how would you differentiate that between what came before us today of adding a second story? I mean, if it was a separate unit, if you're, what's the difference between it being an ADU and converting it to a duplex?
Good question.
Yeah, that's exactly right.
Well, not much. I mean, a duplex is a by right use in, well, certainly in the RM zoning district.
But it's not ministerial. I mean, we get design review on a duplex.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Navarre.
If you were adding a second unit in that scenario, the second unit could be larger, whereas the ADU would have
Right.
to be smaller.
or the
So-
same size.
Right, and the second unit would also count towards floor area ratio, which the ADU does not. So it's
That's right.
so it's a sort of thing where an applicant would have to see what makes sense for them in the long term. Also, since you cannot sell a ADU separately, a duplex, you could condoize that and then sell each unit separately. So there's a lot of considerations when people come in for a new unit to decide if it's an ADU or if they want to do a second unit. And a lot of it has to do with personal circumstances and what they want for that property in the long run. Does that kind of help with that? I was just giving more context than I think you were asking for.
Well, let me just add. When we did our first ADU ordinance, which we used to call them secondary residential units, that was a number of years ago. And the state law at that time was mainly targeted towards cities with a lot of single-family zoning to allow or require them to allow like backyard cottages and in-laws and things like that. Emeryville has never had any single-family zoning. Our zoning has always permitted at least 2 units per lot. And when this original ordinance that we did was put in place, nobody took advantage of it. Nobody used it at all. We didn't have any ADUs or secondary residential units, as they were called at that time, because you could do 2 units by right anyway. And you're right, it did require design review, but it's minor design review at staff level. And I think ADUs required it at that time too. But with the new changes the state has made, there's a lot more advantages to doing an ADU than to doing a second, a duplex, for a lot of the reasons that Navarre enumerated. But also I would note that all of these, we don't have a whole lot of choice here. Most of these things, except these 4 points that Diana has on the screen right now, they're all mandated by the state. They all took effect on January 1st, 2020. We are implementing them right now because we have to. And this ordinance is simply playing catch up. So these questions we're asking you here, that's about the extent of the discretion that we have on this.
Thank you, Charlie. Do we have any other questions from the commissioners at this point? I have one question. Dana, can you speak to any enforcement mechanisms that currently exist in Emeryville for short-term rentals?
When the council adopted short-term rentals, this short-term rental ordinance, they said, we want enforcement to be complaint-driven.
Oh, right.
And I have enforced 2 complaints since then.
Really?
Okay, so in order for enforcement to be enforcement for short-term rentals in our city, we would have to make a complaint to who?
To me.
Got it. Okay.
That's not codified, but that's been the practice.
Thank you. That's my question. All right. So at this point, I want to open it up to public comment for anybody that would like to speak on behalf. And I see an empty room here. And so I'm going to open public comment and close it. Or public hearing.
Public hearing.
Yes.
Public hearing.
And at this point, open it up for deliberation from the commissioners. And I'll begin with Commissioner Young to my right.
Oh, thank you very much. Nice presentation, Diana. Not allow separate sale of affordable ADUs. Not allow separate sale.
Can you talk into your microphone?
Yes. So on the first issue, I think that I'm just kind of thinking of myself as being a person who owns a home, and I have someone in the back and I want to sell it. So, and it would be not to allow that as a staff recommendation. I would agree with that. And then at the same time to allow ADUs up to the size of the principal unit. Now, so that could be kind of interesting. Maybe the principal unit is really tiny, so your ADU would have to be smaller than that. I think that should be not a rule. I think we should look at that. If it makes 8 extra, you get 10 extra square feet, or you get 25 extra square feet because of some other thing that makes sense, a tree or some kind of thing that's in the way. I think to limit that could be an issue. Fourth one, prohibit short-term rentals in all ABU prohibited. So I could agree with that. And then the last one, apply state rules for the number of detached units to attached units. So that one I'm going to kind of defer on that one for the time being. Wasn't the other commissioners might think about that.
Thank you. Do you have any more comments?
No.
Okay. Commissioner Donaldson?
I'm definitely in favor of ADUs. I think we need all the housing that we can get. I'm still going around about having an ADU the same size as the principal unit that's not subject to any kind of other than ministerial objective standard review. So I just have to think about that a little more.
Okay. You got it. Vice Chair Thompson?
Yeah, I also support the creation of ADUs. I think in terms of not allowing the separate sale, I agree with that. Prohibiting the short-term rental, I agree as well. And applying the state rules, I agree. And I think I share the same concern that Commissioner Donaldson does around the question of, you know, if you were to make an ADU the same as the principal unit, you're generating additional units, you know, without the review, and they could be whole additional units at the same size, just generated. Not likely in practice. I mean, that's sort of more of a theoretical idea because each place has a unique condition, and there are probably many places where you can only fit a smaller one anyway. So I guess the only question I had was, you know, what's the staff's sense of, you know, a ministerial review of lots of additional units that are ADUs that are the exact same size as units? I mean, would that substantively change the flavor of Emeryville's residential district?
Well, I think it's just kind of marginal. If we didn't have the provision that it can be up to the size of the principal unit, then the maximum size would be 1,200 square feet. A lot of principal units are less than 1,200 square feet, so this would really only apply to the situation where you had a principal unit that was larger than 1,200 square feet and somebody wanted to build an ADU that was also larger than 1,200 square feet. And if we didn't allow that, then they would just shrink the ADU down to 1,200 square feet.
Okay.
I mean, I think the example that led to this was a proposal to raise a house and put another dwelling unit underneath it. That would be the same footprint as the existing house and therefore the same square footage. And it was proposed to be an ADU, and I think it was a little over 1,200 square feet. Yeah. Sure. But if we limit it to the 1,200, they would figure out some way to carve out some square footage from that, you know, lower level and make it less than 1,200 square feet. Go ahead.
Yeah, I think the example that I staff was thinking of was that if you have an existing building and you have currently unconditioned space on the ground floor, which is not an uncommon circumstance, and you want to make that into an ADU, it's going to be just under probably the size of the principal unit. And you wouldn't really have a significant impact visually even for the neighborhood. It's part of the same building. They're just conditioning that space. But it could have, you know, like a small design impact, right? We're saying, oh, well, it's 100 feet difference or it's 50 feet difference, but you can't do that because we capped it very hard lined. And so I think it's a design flexibility for effective solutions is kind of where that was coming from.
Yeah, given the number of single-family and small units in town, it probably is a pretty minimal situation. So,
I think a bigger thing to me would be the provision about, which we don't have any choices about, which is the provision about multi-unit apartments where you can turn your unused space into ADUs. I would just note that the 6 new units at the Artistry that the commission approved several years ago, under this law, they could all have been ADUs. And we could have, I mean, if they'd requested that they be ADUs, we would have had to approve them over the counter, basically. And that's just how it is.
All right. Are there any more comments from commissioners?
When you talk about size, are you talking about the actual physical dimension or the actual square footage?
Square footage.
Okay.
All
So
right.
it could be bigger, longer, wider, as long as the square footage. That's how you map it out. Okay.
I have some concern about the prohibiting short-term rentals in ADUs, and so I hope we can talk about that a bit more, Diana. So my question about that would be, if somebody comes to Emeryville and purchases a home, and their interest in the home is that there is an accessory dwelling unit that they'd like to use for Airbnb, in addition to living in that home. Would that, if we move forward with these staff recommended choices, would that then prohibit them from being able to do that?
The scenario you're sounding like sounds like they want to live in the big house and make the second house an Airbnb full-time.
Yes.
We don't allow that.
Okay.
You have to, somebody, it doesn't have to be the owner, it can be the owner or a tenant that with the owner's approval lives in that house, and they can rent out the whole house for up to 90 days a year, and they can rent out part of the house for as much as they want. But the idea is that they're owner or master tenant occupied. Right. So the scenario you're looking at is already prohibited.
So it would be a shared Airbnb type experience for the visitor that's sharing a bedroom in a house where the owner lives, but not them able to rent an accessory dwelling unit as an Airbnb. I'm a bit confused. I'm concerned that that's not allowed at this time in Emeryville, correct?
Full-time Airbnb, as people call it, of backyard cottage is not legal in Emeryville now.
Got it. Okay, I have some reservations with that because I think that because the currently the it sounds as though unless somebody says to you and makes a complaint that there's currently an Airbnb, maybe even a multifamily building, such as one that I live in, that can currently exist and occupy an apartment space unless there's no complaint made.
There's that, and there's also all of the HOAs in Emeryville that are big enough that we know about them. And all of the landlord lease agreements that we found out about in a survey prohibit that in the agreement.
Yes, they do.
And the whole short-term rental ordinance started because an HOA kind of wanted city backup to their efforts to enforce their CC&Rs, basically.
Okay, so in terms of what you've said, I still wouldn't support that third point that's listed here to prohibit the short-term rentals in ADUs. The others I'm in full agreement with, and that's where I stand with this one here.
Can I just ask Diana to clarify a little bit? I think the state law, and let me just say, this is a whole huge can of worms. It's not just one state law. It's a whole bunch of different state laws. And trying to put them all together and figure out how they all work together and everything to amend our regulations has been really, kudos to Diana for trying to figure this all out. And there's a table attached to your staff report that lists all the different state laws and all the different provisions of where they came from, and it's super complicated. But the issue about the short-term rentals, I believe the state says ADUs may not be short-term rentals in most situations, except that there is a carve-out where they can be short-term rentals in only certain explicit situations. And so we're just saying, well, let's just prohibit it altogether to make it simpler. Maybe Diana can shed a little more light on where the state says they can be short-term rentals?
And I believe that it is the bill that says you have to issue a building permit for an ADU that is up to 800 square feet, 16 feet high, 4 feet setback from the rear and side yard with no discretionary view. And I think it's in that bill, it says, and if you do that under this bill, then you have to prohibit short-term rentals in that unit,
Oh,
I think.
okay.
So, sorry.
See if Andrea knows better.
And Andrea?
I don't have the bills. Instead, what I have is actually this little book here that has the new laws in. So I have the code section, and so it's 65852.2
Of the government code?
of the government code, and there's some conflicting provisions. So, for example, this looks like A6. It says that the local agency may require that the property be used for rentals of terms longer than 30 days. But then if you go to another section,
Longer than 30 days, that's not a short-term rental.
well, but it says may.
Prohibiting short-term rentals is
May.
requiring
Oh,
30
I
days
see.
or more.
But then there's another provision, which is, it looks like subsection E1(4), and it says a local agency shall require that a rental of the accessory dwelling unit created pursuant to this subdivision be for a term longer than 30 days. So what the issue is with state law, if you have an ADU that comes in today and is processed under this state law, then we have to say that it can't be used for a short-term rental. And so what you're gonna end up with is some ADUs could be used for a short-term rental and some would not for the ones that are processed underneath this specific subdivision. And so what Diana is saying is that for enforcement purposes, that's difficult to manage, and the recommendation is that if you have an ADU, you can't use it as a short-term rental. And Diana, I believe, when we were working on the staff report, you had confirmed that there are no permits. So there's no property owners out there right now that have a permit to have a short-term rental in their ADU.
That's correct.
Right.
So I just providing that information to help you with your deliberations.
Also, the short-term rental provisions of our code only allow short-term rentals in single-family detached houses, right? There can be multiple houses on a lot, but it has to be in conjunction with a single unit that's separate. So but under this new ADU stuff, you can have ADUs in duplexes and other things. You couldn't have a short-term rental in such an ADU because that's not a single unit. So it gets real complicated if, in some situations you could, in some situations you couldn't, and keep track of it all is a nightmare. So that's why the recommendation is to just not allow them in ADUs at all.
Understood. All right, and in that point, I'm the minority. So far, everybody has been in agreement with that one, but I wanted to raise that point. All right. Are there any other comments or questions for staff? All right. Do we have a motion to move forward with the consideration of amending this?
I'll motion to move forward.
Got motion to move forward by Vice Chair Thompson.
I'll second that.
Seconded by Commissioner Donaldson. Can we have a roll call vote, Charlie?
Commissioner Donaldson?
Aye.
Commissioner Young?
Aye.
Vice Chair Thompson?
Aye.
And Chair Guerrero?
Aye.
4 ayes. We will forward your recommendation to the City Council. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay.
All right. Moving along.
Yes.
We have one more item. If I can find my agenda.
General plan.
All right, this is an administrative item, and this is item 9.1, General Plan Annual Progress Report. Diana?
Yes. This is the more fun item. So another year has flown by, and we're doing the 2019 General Plan Annual Progress Report, which includes a report on implementing the general plan and the housing element, and also the successor agency report. The General Plan Annual Progress Report talks about whether or not we've done any general plan amendments, and we have. We adopted a local hazard mitigation plan and put a reference to it and an action item in the safety element. Development decisions, you all probably remember, approving a family shelter at a former recreation center, renovation of a 4-unit building on 64th Street, conversion of a house to a duplex on 55th, and the Marketplace B office, lab, and retail, which you approved. It got appealed in the council in 2020, upheld your approval. The general plan actions, the last chapter of the general plan has actions that implement all the policies in the plan. And I have a typo in this. There are 79 actions, and progress has been made on all of them but 3: locating a new police facility, developing new sign regulations, and developing environmentally preferable purchasing. What has been implemented is the Biz Nexus meetings are happening quarterly. We're developing partnerships with capital providers and incubators. The Rotten City Emeryville Cultural Arts District is happening. In terms of transportation, paid parking is about to happen. San Pablo Avenue multimodal improvements have been studied. The Powell Street pedestrian bicycle safety study is going to be at the next BPAC meeting. Greenway crossings are mostly installed, and the cars do stop more. And railroad crossings are in progress. And the 40th and San Pablo bus hub concept design goes to council next Tuesday. In terms of parks, public facilities, and services, these are just the highlights. Improvements to 5 parks are in the capital improvement program. A refresher class on the community emergency response team was taught. There was a personal emergency preparedness fair and classes about that. In terms of urban design, and plural artists were selected for the Sherwin-Williams open spaces. Signs and art will be included in the 40th Bus Hub project, and bird safe building design ordinance was, study sessions were held and will be here at this meeting soon. In terms of conservation, safety, and noise, railroad crossings were designated as quiet zones. That's the first step. Storm drain trash capture devices have been planned, and we talked about LHMP. In terms of sustainability, solar energy storage program has been developed. Bay-friendly landscaping has been designed for City Hall, and electric vehicle chargers are planned for the city parking garage. Then the housing element annual progress report, that's what the state's really interested in. Covers applications, entitlements, permits, and completions, and major projects completed, and regional housing need allocation progress and implementation of programs. So in terms of applications, the conversion of the house to the duplex on 55th, that was applied for and granted in the same year. Ani 638 unit tower on Christie, and the 5850 Shell Mound 244 unit mid-rise. Combined, those would provide 33 very low income, 52 low income, 64 moderate income, and 149 total affordable units. In terms of entitlement, the conversion of the house to the duplex. In terms of building permits, we didn't happen to issue any building permits this year, but we did have a lot of completions. Avalon Marketplace D on Cell Mound issued occupancy permits for 125 units. Estrella Vista on San Pablo Avenue has 87 units, but 61 of them are in Emeryville. And then the second unit on 45th got occupancy. And the number of affordable units on all of those put together is 46 very low, 22 low, 9 moderate, and a total of 77. Valerie Bernardo did the housing element part of this pretty much, and she made this table, which gives you how many of what affordability levels are in which project. So it shows that the Ani Tower would have quite a few. And that's kind of what I take out of that mostly. The Avalon Public Market was permitted in 2017. The affordable unit lottery has been held,
and they're doing their temporary certificates of occupancy in phases, and they've done 5 phases. And it includes, when it's done, it will include 223 units, including 24 studios, 82 one-bedrooms, 95 two-bedrooms, and 22 three-bedrooms. And that'll include 25 affordable units, including 11 low-income and 14 moderate-income units. And I like this floor plan Valerie found, and it shows that they have wood floors. Estrella Vista 3706 San Pablo was permitted same year, 2017. The lottery was held in August. Temporary CFOs were issued in December, and it includes 61 units in Emeryville and 26 in Oakland. The affordable units, 26 extremely low, 44 very low, and 16 low income. And you can see by this floor plan that these are family-friendly units. The regional housing needs allocation, if you read the 2 columns on the right, you can see what's left. We are 56% through the RENA period, and our total, we have met 39% of it. We're doing pretty well with the market rate, not so well with any of the affordable. So we still have ways to go. I don't know if it's possible that the 2 projects that have applications in now might get completed by mid-2023. If they did, we would meet the total. Implementation of programs. The housing element has 84 programs, and they've made progress on all except educating the HOEs to keep half of their units in ownership to stay eligible for FHA loans, and Valerie plans to do that next year. Program implementation highlights. She picked out one for each of the plan's goals. This year we funded 5 home repairs for low-income households. Collected $204,000 in affordable housing impact fees, issued an RFP for affordable senior housing on the old rec center site, and you all improved the design of the Ani and 5850 Shell Mound projects with your review. We've done counseling for tenant landlord situations and fair housing, and helped with just caused eviction ordinance. We've managed to facilitate mortgage credit certificates to 9 households, and we're redeveloping 2 sites on San Pablo Avenue in the priority development area. This is not part of what we send to the state, but one of our policies is to update this every year. These are the sites that were in the housing element, and it shows what development has happened on them. And the circled callouts are sites where things have happened that are sites that were not in the housing element. This year we added the 12, the Ani site, and the 30, the 5850. So you can see the Ani site was in the housing element as a site. The reason this is green or yellow or whatever it is because a lot of the sites that were in the housing element are under construction or completed. And you can see the Ani line 12 and the 5850 line 30 is what got added this year. And the last part of this is the Housing Successor Annual Report, which provides the governing body with a report on the housing assets and activities within the low and moderate income housing asset fund. So you can see from the expenditures that we spent some money on low income, very low, and extremely low income units. That was at Estrella Vista. We hold some property, which you'll see a picture of in a minute. And the loans and grants receivable, that's first time home buyer loans. So Estrella Vista has a few punch list items left before it gets final CFO. The 36 in San Pablo property has been acquired, and the parcels on Christie Avenue are still in pre-development, partly having to do with cleanup.
If I could just interject some late breaking news, the chief building official has approved final CFO for Estrella Vista this week.
Oh, yay. Yay. I won't say those in this report because this report's about 2019.
Right.
Yay. Good news. The state wants us to check off some interesting boxes. They want to make sure that we're not making most of our housing senior housing, okay, and that we spend 30% of our spending on extremely low income, yes, and we have 167 home ownership loans in our portfolio.
So that completes mine and Valerie's report, and I can answer any questions that I can answer.
Thank you, Diana.
And I hope to get a recommendation for the council.
Great. All right. So at this point, we have we can open up for questions. I'll begin here on my left. Have any questions, Vice Chair Thompson?
No.
No questions. Questions here to my right?
No questions.
No questions.
Yeah, no questions. I think I'll point.
I don't have any questions. All right. And we're looking for a recommendation. Do we have a motion for a recommendation to move this forward to council?
You might want to ask for public comment first.
There we go. That's a great idea. I
Second.
want to open this up for public comment for anybody who'd like to speak on behalf of this item.
Well, I actually have just a question, because
Oh.
all the other ones were public hearings and this is administrative item.
Yeah.
What are they the same?
No. This is public comment, not public hearing.
When it's a public hearing, you have greater notice that goes out.
Okay.
Yeah, but
Thought
the
I'd
public
ask.
has a right to comment on every item on the agenda.
Yes,
Okay.
that's Brown Act.
All right.
Yes. And
The chair just opened it up to public comment and is about to close it, I think.
done. We're going to go ahead and close public comment and open it up for deliberation among the commissioners. And I'll start here again.
Sure. I mean, I'm just happy to get the update and the report, and I think things are going in the right direction. So congratulations and keep doing it.
Commissioner Donaldson?
We have a small city and a small staff, and you've been doing tremendous work. There's just a lot of progress shown, and I'm really pleased to see how much effort has been going into the affordable housing stuff. Even though we aren't quite meeting our goals, we can see that we're moving in that direction.
Yeah, I was only surprised to see no building permits put out. My last year, I was kind of none, zero.
Well, things happen in lumps, I guess.
Yeah, I guess so. And just curious, like those building approvals that has happened, are they set in stone? For the Ani building and some of the other ones, are those set?
The Ani and 5850 are applications,
Okay.
which I was reluctant to tell the state about, but we did it in the housing element, so we did it again today. If they want to know about your applications, they want to know, I think if you look at the state as a whole, the legislature is interested in knowing what we do with the applications in the long run.
Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, just to pick up Commissioner Young's point, I mean, that question about an application versus counting it as completed and potentially meeting, like, I too found that a little bit strange to sort of say, well, there are these applications and there's this potential, absolutely, but there's always so much distance between an application and a completion.
Yes.
Okay.
Okay.
I don't have any further comments, and I would move to move a recommendation. I myself not moving it, but that's what I would recommend. Do we have a motion?
I'll motion to move that recommendation to the council.
Okay, motion moved by Commissioner Young. Do we have a second?
Sure.
Seconded by Commissioner Donaldson. Charlie, can we have a roll call?
Commissioner Commissioner Donaldson?
Aye.
Commissioners Keller and Sohani are absent. Commissioner Young?
Aye.
Vice Chair Thompson?
Aye.
Chair Guerrero?
Aye.
4 ayes. We will forward your recommendation to the City Council. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Diana. All right. So we have item number 10 here, Planning Commissioner comments. Do we have any comments from the commissioners?
I do have a comment.
Yes.
Yeah.
Chair Donaldson, or Vice Chair Thompson.
Whichever. So, no, I was struck by our conversation around the elimination of minimum parking requirements. And so I think my comment is really to keep an eye on it, on what might be an issue and what might not be an issue, but that I think it's one of those things that it becomes raised when talking about parking requirements. Is that there, as Charlie mentioned, that the question around most developers want to provide parking, need to provide parking because they can't get financing, they can't move forward with a development in the marketplace, tells you how embedded cars are in the marketplace. and how they are supported financially, whether it's through the financing or through the sale and purchase of developer properties. But my question really is, are we starving transit? Are we starving bikes? Are we starving the alternatives? Because we have this whole market mechanism around developing cars that even when we take it out of our regulations, we still find that the greater society is supporting this through the way that we price things. So this is just a comment. I know you're sort of thinking you want to respond. I don't need a response. And it's just something for the commissioners to think about and the broader community to think about, is that, what is the market mechanism that really makes the alternatives viable and real? And what can a community do to participate, think about, structure, if it's not the planning regulations, because it may not be, is there something else? And I think it's just something for us to think about as we consider all the other tools that we have. Is there a way to really make alternatives real so that we don't have these conversations about, we're not going to have anything left if we take the cars away. So it's just more support for alternatives and making them real and trying to find mechanisms to do that.
Thank you, Vice Chair Thompson.
Yeah,
I appreciate that.
Yeah.
Yeah. Were there any other comments?
I just had one. Just as I was leaving my building today, one of the tenants in my building was complaining about crow poop all over the sidewalk. She wanted to deal with that, and I'm at 50 on a Horton next to the Amtrak station. And also she said that something kind of interesting during the winter, those bike lane bollards that we had placed to separate the road from the bike lanes, apparently the guys who go in and do the street sweeping can't seem to get behind them, so the leaves start to collect there, and it's creating a mass amount of mold and weeds growing right out of the leaves that are not being cleaned up by the street sweepers. So there's just two comments that I wanted to kind of make. And then in terms of, I also kind of am on this parking thing. I know it's a heated.
Okay, so I'm just going to stop that right here. This is planning commissioner comments, and if you would like to, provide direction to staff to put something on a future agenda so that you can discuss this topic, that would be appropriate. But to rehash policies at this point, that's not what commissioner comments are about.
Okay, very good.
Thank you, Andrea. Do you have any further comments beyond what you were speaking about?
Nope.
All right. It looks like Commissioner Donaldson might have something to say.
I just had one observation, one comment that relates also to our Commissioner Barrera, which was concerning the Hilton Garden Inn and the loss of the banquet room. Apparently, I read an article last week in the paper about the great stir that has come up in San Francisco Chinatown because of restaurants closing down their banquet rooms and losing this great cultural asset that people have all of their family gatherings, have all kinds of, life-marking events there. And I think that it was interesting that that's come up as a real public issue over there when we've just lost one over here.
Thank you, Commissioner Donaldson. All right. Seeing no further comments from commissioners, I'm going to go ahead and close this meeting at 9:20.